increments, rather, Israeli hostages will be released. 3, 4, 4, and 4. That's not 33 yet. And only after the 16th day, once Israel has reciprocated and exchanged those hostages for Palestinian prisoners in Israel, several hundreds of them, almost 1,000, only then will the remaining hostages be released. That is supposed to lead to phase 2, which includes an Israeli redeployment or withdrawal, if you will, from most of Gaza. And assuming that the ceasefire holds, then we move on to the so-called post-war Gaza phase, which is basically the third phase. But you know what? I'll take the first phase first, and then we'll see. Now, why does it expose the weaknesses? Because at any given point, a flagrant violation of the ceasefire could bring down the entire process. And the question is, Dorothy, what constitutes a violation?
And I also want to bring our viewers to the attention of the screen that you're seeing here. That is, of course, a look at Doha, Qatar, where the negotiations have been taking place with the parties, with Israeli officials and with Hamas. We are standing by to take you live to a press conference that is expected to have representatives from the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Qatar and also from the Foreign Affairs Minister himself to give us more details about this ceasefire deal. Again, sources reporting that a deal has been reached. Also, want to bring you some reaction from the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump. On Truth Social, he has posted this, saying, "We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you." So this is some of the breaking news coming through to us right now. Again, I've got with me right now Alon Pincus, a former Israeli foreign policy advisor, and we are dissecting some of what it has taken to get to this particular ceasefire deal that we're hearing sources report at this stage. Now, in terms of the reaction we were talking about in Israel itself as well, people very tentative because every single detail of these deals matter. So tell us, what we might expect in terms of those specifics.
Well, again, the specifics are that it's a 42-day deal that begins with a 16-day phase in which, in increments, 33 Israeli hostages will be released, hoping that the ceasefire holds. Then we move to the second phase, which includes not only the remaining hostages in exchange for hundreds, almost 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israel, but that also includes an Israeli withdrawal or military redeployment gradual in Gaza. And all this, again, contingent upon the ceasefire holding. Now, there was a report today, Arti, that the U.S. provided Hamas with assurances that Israel will not resume the fighting after the first phase, and this indeed would lead to the second phase. Now, the second phase, which, as I mentioned just a moment ago, includes an Israeli withdrawal, gradual, but nonetheless withdrawal, is the phase that Hamas is most interested in having. And that is why they demanded U.S. assurances. Now, it's a good question for which I have no answer. Who gave those assurances? Because we're seeing something very odd here, Arthi. We're seeing two administrations dealing with this, the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration. This is almost unprecedented, that you have envoys and people from both administrations, the outgoing and the incoming, involved in this. And I don't know who gave those assurances, and I don't know if Israel is aware of those assurances. And so my point to you is that the details matter absolutely. But the key here is whether or not the ceasefire is going to hold. Otherwise, it'll all collapse.
Alon, thank you so much for your thoughts on this. We appreciate your analysis as we continue to track this breaking news. That is Alon Pincus. He is a former Israeli foreign policy advisor. And I want to bring back now our CBC correspondent, Sasha Petrusik, who is in Jerusalem tracking all of these developments, as he has been for several days now. And of course, Sasha, a note for our viewers, the breaking news, sources reporting that a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israeli officials and Hamas. Now, we are also watching on your screen there, you see a podium set up. That is in Doha. We are expecting to hear from Qatari officials to offer confirmation of the deal and perhaps also specifics. What of that do we know at this stage, Sasha?
Well, the next steps in all of this will be to find out what those specifics are, but we may not hear those tonight because as we have been hearing here in Israel, this deal still needs to be approved by the Knesset, by the Israeli parliament. That process is going to take place tomorrow, or start taking place tomorrow. Not only with the cabinet, but also with a vote in the Knesset itself. There is opposition there. Some of the hardline parties, the right-wing parties that are part of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government have been strongly opposed to this, saying that this is going to lead to a catastrophe, in their words, and that the right thing to do would have been to continue fighting Hamas until total victory, in their words. That's been their slogan for some time. Now, they may or may not, all of them may or may not vote against this. One of the parties has been a little bit vague about whether they will support it or not, even though they're opposed to it. But none of that is likely to affect the outcome, which is that this is likely to pass the Knesset and therefore be part of the process. Now, if it does, then the government is going to be releasing the names of the 33 Israeli hostages who are set to be released. Some of those are not alive anymore, but the majority is, according to the Israeli government, and therefore they will start to be released as soon as Sunday. We are hearing, and that 3 are expected to be let go at that point, which will kickstart the rest of the process, the rest of the parts of this ceasefire, this phase of the ceasefire, as we've been hearing. It has been very, very complicated. There is a very specific schedule about who will be released and when and how many, and what Israel has committed itself to do in response. So we will be hearing the very specifics of all of that probably tomorrow here in Israel, when the Israeli government actually gears up to implement this. We are hearing of some troop movements in Gaza even tonight in order to get ready for this. But obviously, until it is announced, until the Israeli government has formally accepted this agreement, it will not actually be put into effect, and no hostages are expected to be released, which is the key for many here in Israel, until Sunday at the earliest, as far as we're hearing.
And of course, for continuing to watch, you see the screen in front of you there, that in Doha, we are expecting to get officials in regards to a ceasefire deal being reached between Israeli officials and Hamas in regards to a ceasefire in Gaza and the conflict there. Our Sasha Petrusik in Jerusalem has been covering this for us. Another question as well for you in regards to the potential for a deal here. We know that Gaza has devolved into really a humanitarian crisis. So in terms of aid coming in following a ceasefire deal, what do we know to that end?
We're pushing for more aid, more humanitarian aid to move in, because many parts of Gaza have been suffering for really for months now, with very limited medical care, shortages of medicine, as well as food and clean drinking water. Really, even tents have been a difficulty. So it's been, life there has been miserable for about 2 million people, more than 2 million people, for months now, and that is one of the elements in this deal, that aid moving in, the trucks that will be allowed in by Israel and then distributed presumably by the same international organizations, including UNRWA. It has said that it is going to continue distributing aid in Gaza, even though Israel has has taken some moves against it. It doesn't trust the UN organization. But it is the main organization in there. It will continue functioning, as well as many other NGOs that are in there. One of the big problems, though, has been that that this area has also dissolved into lawlessness, and many NGOs have said that they are having trouble distributing this food because even if they are allowed to bring these trucks of aid in, that the Israeli government has not been providing security in Gaza, and since Hamas has been pushed back, that really it is a lawless territory where it's very difficult to get this stuff around. So these are going to be challenges that will remain even if the amount of aid going in increases. And we're hearing that that increase could be perhaps as much as 3 times what has been going in on average over the past month. So this is very critical. It's very important to a lot of people who are in desperate need of it. But even if there is a ceasefire deal, which includes an increase in flow of aid, there may be huge difficulties in getting it in and getting it distributed. So that may be one of the next hurdles that that the international community, Israel, Hamas, and the people of Gaza have to face.
Sasha, thank you for this. Our Sasha Petrusik is reporting for us in Jerusalem. Of course, you'll stick around as we continue to track the details on this breaking news story. And for our viewers, I also want to bring in our chief correspondent, Adrian Arsenault, who will be leading the coverage on this breaking news story that sources reporting a ceasefire deal has been reached in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Adrian.
Archie, it's good to be here and talking about this. There are so many unanswered questions, though, as certainly Sasha in the region knows. We talk about it as a ceasefire, cannot talk about it yet as the end of the war. So it's, 466 days since October 7, 2023, that terrible day. But that doesn't mean this is over. This is strictly a conversation right now, a resolution about phase 1 of the ceasefire deal. As you heard Sasha talking about the release of these hostages, this humanitarian phase, they're calling it. You're looking at women and children, people who are certainly unwell under the age of 19, some of the elderly as well, alive, hopefully all of them in that first phase, but that's far from clear. I think you can be certain that there are some of the American hostages, at least 2 of them who have American citizenship will be released. But of course, there are people waiting for bodies, remains as well. I think about the Canadian family of Judith Weinstein, who are certainly waiting to find out if her body will be released. This doesn't mean, though, that the war is over. There is no guarantee yet that after this 6-week phase, that all the guns will fall silent. And that has certainly people very worried. There will be enormous relief in Gaza. I was watching some clips of some small children earlier today saying that what they want to do when the truce happens, and they want to sleep in their own beds and they want to play with their toys, they want life again. But there is also a genuine fear. Sasha, who is still in Jerusalem, I think you're still on the line with us, Sasha. There was a holdup in this deal. There were expectations. Sunday, there was an indication something was coming. People thought maybe Monday, maybe last night. We started to hear conversations that Hamas had wanted to see some maps, and there was a holdup. What was happening there, if you can?
Yeah, well, Adrian, as you know, pretty much anything can hold up this process, and they've been circling around a number of really critical issues. We don't know for sure, but it looks as though Hamas had concerns about how far back Israeli troops were actually going to be moving toward the borders. They're going to be staying in Gaza, but as part of this first phase, they are going to be, they have given the commitment to stay within about 800 meters, we understand, of the borders inside Gaza, so squished against those. But Hamas had been initially insisting that they leave altogether. Then the talk was about 350 meters from the border. and now apparently it's 800 meters. And on top of that, there are two key corridors, if you like, that Israel has wanted to protect, to keep control of. One of them is across the middle of the country, which it was using to keep everybody, as many people as they could, the civilians as well as the fighters within Gaza, from moving back into the northern part of Gaza. It was insisting that in order to keep the fighting from continuing in the north, in order to keep militants from coming back into areas that Israel had cleared, it needed to do that. Initially, it wanted to prevent anyone from moving to the north, and it looks as though that has been resolved and people will be allowed back, probably with security measures in place along the way, perhaps similar to what you see at the airport, where people will be scanned before they move up to the north. We've been hearing about that. But these maps also talked about this Philadelphia corridor, which has been critical for Israel along the border between Gaza and Egypt, about 14 kilometers long, about 100 meters wide. Seems like a small piece of land, but for Israel, it considers it critical because this is where it says Hamas was smuggling in weapons, including these rockets and missiles that Hamas has been using to fire into Israel. And so Israel said, we have to keep our troops, our soldiers there, even after, well, they were saying even after this whole war was over, in order to prevent these things from being smuggled in, usually in tunnels underneath. Hamas was very, very sensitive about this, and it's quite probable that that was one of the key elements on these maps. But the whole element of where Israeli troops will remain, even for these next 6 weeks, never mind the long term, has been one of the key critical issues and probably holding up the deal as we are seeing it now.
And Sasha, just a quick follow there. When we talk about the 6 weeks, and we hear that hostages will be released starting on Sunday, if we recall in November of 2023, where there was that sort of 6-day ceasefire, the hostages only came out a few at a time. I gather that's still the expectation, that you're not going to see a big group of people on that first day, that maybe there'll be 2 or 3 people and then a few more the next day. Is that the understanding?
Yes, Adrian. In fact, there is a very precise schedule that is laid out in the agreement about how many will be released after how many days. And quite possibly, we haven't seen the schedule now, but it's quite possible that the actual names of who will be released on which day is also part of this. We're talking about groups of 3s and 4s. We have heard that on Sunday, they have already chosen 3 women to be released as the beginning of the release of the hostages. That will be followed a few days later by 4 others and 3 others and 4 others. And so over these 6 weeks, this will happen as far as Hamas is concerned, as long as Israel keeps its side of the bargain. And one of the parts of that side of the bargain is that Israel releases hundreds of Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails. So that is also part of the schedule, and it's a very much an orchestrated, a choreographed process, really, for the next 6 weeks.
Okay. Sasha, thanks. Hang tight. I know we'll be back to you, but we want to talk about what's happening in Gaza right now. So good person to bring in, of course, UNICEF spokesperson James Elder. James, as I understand it, last time you were in Gaza was just in November. So I know the sights and sounds are horribly fresh for you. What is your gut telling you about the ceasefire deal reached today?
Oh, Adrian, it's not even my gut. It's just the messages I'm getting flooding through from people in Gaza that this is the moment that they have waited for. Going back, I mean, yes, I was there in November. I was also there the previous November, Adrian, and I will never forget a young father who had a 2-year-old and a 7-month-old saying to me, there is just one thing I want to do when this war ends. And I asked him what. Remember, this is 6 weeks into this horror. And he said, I just want to cry. We are 14 months later on. So there is a level of trauma and devastation that is it quite impossible to describe. But right now, whether you're hearing the noise from Khan Yunis or from Deir Bala, or no doubt those families, those long-suffering families in Israel who are waiting to hear news of their family members who've been hostages, this is very, very good news. It's the beginning. Let's be very clear. There is no more devastated patch of land on the planet right now, and the trauma is unprecedented. But if this goes through, if this gets signed off by the Israeli parliament, then we have a starting point, and it's so overdue. And it's a cause for celebration.
So, James, as we speak, I just want to explain for our viewers that on the right side of the frame, you're seeing an empty podium. That is because we are waiting for the Qatari officials in Doha to come and offer some sort of announcement. We've seen some movement there, so we anticipate that happening soon-ish. We're just going to keep an eye on it. But back to you, James, if we may. We were just speaking with Sasha Petrusek in Jerusalem about timelines, about hostages coming out. But I think about what needs to go into Gaza right now in terms of medical assistance, in terms of food aid. Do you have a list of priorities that you think must happen right away? And do you have any expectation that they will happen?
Absolutely. It's a great question. I've been talking to colleagues about this all last week. What do we prioritise? For UNICEF, it's medicines, it's food, it's fuel for those hospitals, remembering that we are now looking at less than a third of hospitals partially functioning there. So the stress on the medical system and with hundreds of children in critical conditions because of the severity of bombardment, Adrian. Now, 120 children have been killed in the 2 weeks of this year. So many, many more injured. So it's medical supplies, it's fuel, it's food, and it's tents. There's been the last 3 months of 2024 were probably the worst three in the course of this horrendous war in terms of getting aid in. So you've got families who have been pushed, to the very, very brink, who've lost homes, who've seen their homes just turned into rubble, who are in tents, who are cold. They just need blankets and tents. So these are our priorities. But remembering, we've gone from aid restrictions, meaning the last 3 months of last year were the worst we have seen, to suddenly now the talk is of 500-600 trucks a day. That's going to need the support of both sides here. That's going to need the Israelis making sure there's security. That's going to need many more crossing points. It's going to need an enormous amount of work. It doesn't just happen with a signing on the paper, but yes, the United Nations is ready to go. We need all sides to now go beyond signing and really come together to ensure that those families, those children get the food, the blankets, the medicines, the drugs that they need.
I'm just thinking about when you say 500 or 600 trucks, it might be that some are listening to that and thinking, oh, that's a lot. But that is basically what was happening before the war, correct?
No, exactly. So that's what was happening before the war. And that was not just humanitarian aid. Before the war, it was commercial trucks. That's what Gaza required. Gaza has been, has been occupied for more than a decade. Well, for almost 20 years. So a lot of commercial supplies were coming in every single day, and to the quantity of 500 trucks. Now we've gone to a trickle. So we've gone down to around 50 trucks a day. At the same time, we've seen a fishing industry, an agricultural industry devastated. So the ability to produce local products. I mean, Gaza was a place where it was known in the north for its strawberries. It had strawberries that were popular around the world. These things are gone. So yeah, we need to get 500-600 trucks in a day at a time where the number of crossings has been reduced. There's a time where we've seen huge restrictions on the surveys of trucks, of things going in. And I don't mean for major issues, I mean for small dual use things like, scissors for medical supplies or oxygen cylinders. We have to get past these hurdles if we are going to get that amount of aid. And we need more routes in Gaza. Gaza's been devastated to an apocalyptic level. And I know we've heard so much language, Adrian, used around, apocalyptic and catastrophic. That's what Gaza looks like. Around 70% of buildings have been destroyed or have been damaged. So the level of devastation of people's homes, to the networks that we need as the United Nations to reach people, and to their psychology. We are in uncharted territory, and child psychologists I spoke to when I was last in Gaza were really worried that the worst is yet to come. It's when children go home. It's when they see their home turn to rubble. It's when they realise that their aunt isn't missing, their aunt is dead, that we're going to be in an even worse situation for these children. So This ceasefire is a brilliant beginning, and now we need all actors to focus all their attention on what do children need and how do we get it to them.
Okay, James, this is really helpful. I can only imagine how busy you're about to be. I certainly know that there's a world full of journalists who are desperate to get into Gaza to once and for all put more eyes on exactly what has happened in there. I have no idea when that will happen. Obviously, life-saving aid is the priority. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder, I have no doubt we will be talking again soon. Thank you, James.
Thanks so much.
So let's bring in Dave Harden now. Dave is a former senior advisor to U.S. President Barack Obama's special envoy for Middle East peace. Dave, you also spearheaded stabilization efforts, as I understand it, in the West Bank and Gaza for USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. Same question I'm sort of asking everyone so far, your reaction to breaking news. I suppose this wasn't a shock. This is the proposal, effectively, that's been on the table since May or June.
Adrian, thank you for having me on again. I really enjoyed being with CBC. I'm with you all a lot, so thank you. Look, it's not new and it's not done. I get that it's announced and there's a lot of excitement and exuberance behind us, but my understanding is that the Israeli Security Cabinet needs to clear on this. Let's hope that that happens and that the hostages will be coming out as early as Sunday, and that the ceasefire will go into effect and the people of Gaza will get some relief. But it's, we don't have a deal until we have a deal, even though everybody's already announcing it.
So, Dave, you know the characters at play here in the sense of, I mean, you certainly understand the political climate. We are days away from a new president coming in who threatened effectively that all hell would break loose if the hostages weren't out, if there wasn't some sort of ceasefire by the time he took the oath. And then you have a president who is desperately hoping that he can accomplish this in the last moments of his watch. How much, that all feels symbolic, but how much does that translate to real pressure at the table if you have both the Trump officials and the Biden officials there in Doha?
But I think what's different this time is the Trump effect. And there's no doubt because he's not predictable and he carries an enormous amount of influence in Middle East circles. It's the wasta, the Arabic term for influence. And I think that he has the unique capability of putting pressure on Netanyahu and his coalition to finally agree to this deal.
As we're speaking, Dave, I just want to let people know we've changed the image on the right side of your screen. You're looking at Han Yunis there. Han Yunis has been certainly devastated in this war. People are out. Clearly, it's it's late there. It's not too late, but clearly word has spread and they're waiting. What I'm unclear about is whether there's any reason for them to feel safe between now and Sunday. Dave, do you have any understanding of, is it possible that the fighting continues right up until Sunday? Or would you anticipate that it starts to slow now?
I mean, you might have both, right? It slows down and the fight continues. I mean, I think you saw that in the ceasefire with Hezbollah and Israel, where the fighting kind of went up to the time frame. And that has also, by the way, been the experience between the Israelis and Hamas in all the prior conflicts. So it's probably safer now, but it's not safe. And beyond that, the situation on the ground, even if the actual fighting stopped, is highly dangerous. I mean, there's an enormous amount of unexploded ordnances and toxic rubble and water and wastewater, running amok. And so there's an enormous amount of risks no matter what.
I bet. Listen, thank you very, very much. I am sure you wanted to be a fly on the wall in Doha to try to understand exactly the intricacies of what happened. But certainly this is enormous relief for a whole bunch of people. It's not the end of it. I take what you're saying very clearly. It's not the end of it, but it's a start towards the end.
Sure, it's the beginning of the next chapter. Let's hope.
Indeed. Dave, thank you. That's Dave Harden, former senior advisor to U.S. President Barack Obama's special envoy for Middle East peace. So again, just to recap here, after months of on and off negotiations amid the anguished pleas from Israeli hostage families, the desperate cries for relief and sheer safety from Gaza, a ceasefire deal has now been reached between Israel and Hamas. So that word comes to us out of Doha, Qatar, which is the scene of the negotiations a short time ago. This is a deal that effectively was on the table starting from the Biden administration in May or June. It's had some stops and starts, some tweaks that have been made to it. We will learn more about the intricacies of the deal. We're keeping an eye on what is happening in Doha right now. You're looking at these pictures here of Han Yunis in Gaza. People, again, waiting for more information, just out on the streets talking about possibly, I would imagine, the prospect of some peace. Senior correspondent Sasha Petrusik is on the story and is in Jerusalem, has been there for a while. And Sasha, you spent years there. As this night progresses and word sort of gets cemented that this is happening, what are you hearing in terms or reading in terms of reaction from both Gaza and the West Bank as well as Israel?
Yeah, Israelis have really been divided in some ways about this. There's no question that there's been in the past days and weeks overwhelming support for exactly this kind of a deal, and especially for bringing hostages home. But the one thing that has divided them is, well, not just one thing, two things really. The first is that even among the hostage families, there was a division about whether Israel should accept this kind of phased-in approach that basically, because the country wants everybody home, that it should be an all-or-nothing deal, that give Hamas whatever it wants in terms of a stop to the fighting if all of the hostages are released at once. And there's about 100 of them, just short of that right now. Many of them are known to be dead. Some of them are believed to be dead. And obviously many are still alive. But that number is not clear. In any case, though, these families and many others in Israel have said that you know, let's get everybody home at once, because they are afraid that if this first phase happens, and there isn't a second phase, and there isn't a third phase, that all of the hostages now, that it's really getting too late to bring them home, and that they will not survive. They will be killed in one form or another by Hamas, perhaps by the fighting itself, as has happened to a number of hostages already. So that's been one of the divisions. The other division has been really the one that's reflected what's been happening at the political level, in the Knesset, in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's own coalition government. He has extreme right-wing members in that parties and members in that coalition government who have insisted from the beginning that this battle, this fight, this war has to continue until, as they say, total victory against Hamas. And it doesn't matter that we cannot let the hostages or the fate of the hostages stand in the way of that total victory. And they have actually boasted about having stood in the way of previous attempts at this kind of a ceasefire deal. So they have stood in the way of it, and they have had support from the people who support their political parties, many of them settlers in the West Bank, many of them among the population of Jerusalem in particular. They have seen this as a battle against Hamas, and you either win it or you don't, but you can't allow yourself to be distracted by the lives of hostages. Those are the kind of arguments that they have made almost in those words. So this is the kind of debate that's been going on in Israel. But I can tell you that in the past few days, that majority that has been in favor of a deal, any kind of deal, to bring more hostages home, that majority has been very vocal. It has been out there. It has been very nervous that this will fall apart at the last minute. But it has been pushing the government very strongly to this time actually go through with a deal and not just talk about it as they have for months now.
Indeed. You know, even as you say that, Sasha, I remember when we, back in November of 2023, when that initial ceasefire was happening, right up until the last minute, there was a live camera looking over Gaza, and there were explosions that were still happening to the last second. So I think as you quite rightly point out, anything can happen between now and then. I think that doesn't mean it's not dangerous. Certainly for people in Gaza right now, we're looking at them in Han Yunis milling around. They must feel relief, but also pretty wary that it's not, the guns are not silent yet. As you hang tight there, Sasha, and just so our viewers at home are aware, every now and then the shot flips, and you will see pictures, as we just did while Sasha was speaking, of the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Just keeping an eye. We have several live cameras through the agencies that are there, just keeping an eye on what is happening in the region. But Arthi Paul, who is with me here and will be throughout the next few hours, you were just having a look at the official statements that are out there. And certainly Donald Trump was right out of the gate, eh?
Absolutely. Even before we really have any confirmation, as we know, we are waiting to hear from officials in Qatar about this negotiation. We did get a response from the U.S. president-elect, and we know that politically there are two, as you've been discussing, two, the outgoing president and the incoming president trying to take credit for this deal. In terms of the reaction that we've got here from Donald Trump, he put out on social media, on Truth Social Media, that we have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you. And then this much longer statement to add, saying this epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. Now, it's interesting to sort of look into that political dynamic, because even in the conversation that I was having with a former Israeli foreign policy advisor, he really said that the catalyst or the deal breaker, this was his estimation, his opinion here, was Donald Trump coming in. And we've certainly heard from our correspondent that these weighted pressures from two administrations may have really been the sort of key to finally reaching a deal here. But you do see that sort of struggle to see who will take credit for something. Either way, of course, a pause in the fighting. Good news, but we're continuing to track what other reactions we see from world leaders, and we anticipate there will be a lot of that.
Interesting that we haven't seen anything from the Biden White House yet.
Not yet, and we are looking for that right now, especially when we're talking about these two, leaders of the United States hoping to take credit for the work that has been done. And essentially what I heard from the former Israeli foreign policy advisor in my discussion with him was that this is the very similar deal to what was presented by the Biden administration months in advance. Of course, we don't know the details yet, but that was his estimation. And so interesting to see then what details come out, how similar it was to previous deals, and whether it was, in fact, that pressure that was sort of the final catalyst there.
There are a number of theories that are out there about why this happened now. Certainly, that is, the lowest hanging fruit is that there's a new president being inaugurated on Monday, and both the incoming and outgoing administration officials were at the table in Doha. You're looking, by the way, at this is Tel Aviv. These are the families of the hostages on a vigil here. But there are other things that are at work. There is some suggestion that there's been growing pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu from his own military establishment that his goals for the war, from their perspective, have been diminishing after killing Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, also a Hamas leader. They died. A lot of the infrastructure of Hamas was certainly flattened and taken out, not eliminated. That there's been a regional weakening. So there was a ceasefire deal with Lebanon, but they also killed Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah. That you've seen Bashar al-Assad leave from Syria. So there have been some shifts regionally. There is some anxiety amongst the Israeli military establishment. They've seen a number of soldiers die in the last few days in Gaza, which might be suggesting to some of them that Hamas is rebuilding faster than they had perhaps thought. So again, that might have been another pressure point. But overhanging all of this, of course, an incoming and outgoing, very motivated on both parts, U.S. administration. As much as Donald Trump is celebrating and saying that this was his doing, and it happened because he won. It's the implementation of this deal. It's one thing to get a deal, it's something else to maintain it. The implementation of this will fall on his watch, so we will see. Few people know this better in the world, I think, than CBC senior international correspondent Margaret Evans in London, who spent many, many years there, still goes back and forth. Margaret, as you watch these pictures, you hear what's being said. What are you thinking?
Well, you know, I guess it's turned me into a skeptic. I want to hear what the Israeli government response is going to be. And as you have been talking about, there are a lot of, there are a lot of obstacles still in the road. This is an initial temporary deal, which is a part of a three-part deal, and there are lots of places where it could go wrong. So we've been, called on this time and time again, so I guess I'm waiting to see both sides come out and to actually see the detail of what we've been hearing, because we've been hearing lots of tidbits, but of course the devil is always in the detail, and it sounds like they're putting off a lot of the detail until the second phase. That's why you have that worry amongst the Israeli families of the hostages who are demanding that all of, they're not happy with the deal and that it doesn't bring everybody out all at once. I think for the Palestinians in Gaza, at least it will offer some temporary respite. There's been heavy bombing over the past couple of days, more than 60 people dead there. So I'm waiting, cautiously optimistic that maybe this is a path towards the beginning of something that would change the region for the better, but that's a pretty big ask.
Yes, certainly no one is overstating this, that no one is using the language like the war is over, because it certainly doesn't appear to be so. There's been a lot of pressure internally in Israel, certainly from Benjamin Netanyahu's, the far-right members of his coalition. How is he positioned on this? People are furious with him, as I understand it, in Israel. The hostage families, average Israeli citizens are still livid with Benjamin Netanyahu. What happens with him now?
Yeah, I'd say that's a tightrope he's been walking for well over a year now. He is a political survivor. I think at the beginning of all this, nobody thought he would still be in office. Right now, all attention is on his cabinet and those hard-right nationalist members of the cabinet who see this is a great opportunity for their own aspirations, and they've got a big decision to make. They've threatened to bring his government down by pulling out if he goes ahead with the hostage deal. But if they do that, that would trigger elections, and of course it would disrupt this process, no doubt, and that would further enrage the families of the hostages, the Israelis who want to see this come to an end. But their decision is going to be about, do they stand a better chance of achieving their goals, their aspirational goals, which are ultimately the annexation of the West Bank, the occupied West Bank, moves amongst nationalist settler, Jewish settler groups who would like to even see parts of Gaza resettled. Those are their big goal dreams. So on the one hand, they want to see Israel continuing its war in Gaza, and essentially many would say that what they want is to see the Palestinians pushed out of there. And they want to be able to claim the West Bank as their own. They say they have a biblical right to it. So they're going to have to gauge where are they going to get, what's going to help them achieve their goals the most. Is it to bring down this government and potentially prolong the war in Gaza? Or is it to sit with Benjamin Netanyahu or demand concessions from him in achieving those future goals in order to stay in the cabinet? And are they also looking at the incoming U.S. administration, Donald Trump's second term? He was very favorable to some parts of their interpretation of the occupied territories in his first presidency. Are they counting on maybe having more support from him, and will they stay in? A lot of pressure on them to stay in, I would say, at this point. But that's a big backdrop of the evening as we wait to see what the Israeli government will do in terms of, rubber stamping this agreement.
Margaret, does anything surprise you about the fact that we're still waiting for a statement out of Doha? I think one of the traits of being a journalist, particularly in this region, is that you certainly don't get optimistic very often, and you anticipate last-minute hiccups. Anything unusual about the empty podium, or do you think that's just sort of de rigueur?
Certainly it's de rigueur, but it does make you, remind you of all the times you thought that we were on the brink of an agreement in the past. I'd also say that, there's been a lot of talk about how close they were in the spring, and it makes me think for people on all sides, of how much anguish that must fill people with. Palestinians who've lost thousands since then, more than 10,000 we hear, and the families of the hostages who saw that as a chance to bring their loved ones home, and some haven't come home since then. So, you sit on the edge and you hope that they're close, but the silence, there have been so many things along the way. And there are so many little things, even in the first phase, which has apparently been decided, which aren't clear. For instance, that, how do people get home on foot? The Palestinians are supposedly to be allowed to return to the north on foot, but much of the north has been changed, destroyed. The debate about what kind of buffer zone the Israelis are going to be able to keep. And then, of course, everybody's waiting for those moments of the exchanges. The first 3 hostages to be released, we understand, will be women. And in the following days, you will see the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails as well. There are about more than 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails at this stage.
Okay, Margaret, hang tight. It's going to be a long few days, but important ones. That's Margaret Evans, senior international correspondent in our London bureau, long-time journalist out of that region. Just a little update I'm seeing here from the Israeli president's office. Isaac Herzog has just met with the president of the International Red Cross to talk about the preparations for the hostage deal. This is a very delicate moment. It's the logistics of how you transfer someone from the custody of Hamas. There are other groups, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also hold some hostages. Where are they? How do you get them? How do you transfer them? Where does that transfer happen? Who goes first? These are delicate issues that are about to be talked through as we speak. So while you think about that, we have another guest joining us. Ido Moed is Israel's ambassador to Canada. So, Ambassador, thank you very much for spending time with us on this day. And I'm just wondering, as we're asking everyone, your thoughts on reaction to what appears certainly to be a ceasefire deal.
Thank you for having me. In my eyes, today is the culmination of the disaster that Hamas has unleashed on Israel, on the Palestinians, on the whole region on the 7th of October. We are dealing with the aftermath of an attempted genocide against Israel in its worst sense. And we are going to see, very hopefully, the return of people who have been held captive in dungeons of the Hamas underneath the ground for 467 days. Some of them have not survived. Some of them were, their bodies were abducted. Judy Weinstein's body, a Canadian Israeli, who was murdered on the 7th of October. So it's a very sad day. It's the culmination of evil as we see it, as we know it. We are trying to come to terms with it. This is it's a sort of a wound, an open wound in Israeli society that will perhaps start to heal now when we'll have our loved ones back.
Ambassador, can you forgive my my apprehension and skepticism for a moment? It can be very confusing when we read the wires. AP is reporting from only a few minutes ago that the office of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the ceasefire deal is still not reached. So and we're not seeing anybody at that podium in Doha. What are you hearing from government officials on the ground? Are we just being anxious and impatient, or is something up?
Well, you know that the information that has been made available to all of us through various channels, there are so many moving parts here. There are so many details to iron out. It is extremely complicated. This kind of a deal, when we have a genocidal terrorist organization hiding underneath the ground in a Gaza Strip with the only aim is to kill and destroy the state of Israel, it is very hard to come to terms with that kind of an entity. So it is hard. And so unless we know that we are able to achieve our goals that we set out at the beginning of the war, which is the release of the hostages, the end of Hamas military threat against Israel, and the end of Hamas as a government in the Gaza Strip, unless we know that we are getting closer, it is very difficult for our government to sign any kind of a deal.
Do you have a sense of what it is in particular that might be holding it up right now?
No, I don't know, but I would like to say, just take a moment, all of us, to think about not only what is playing out right now in Israeli streets, the anguish and the expressions of trauma, but also to understand where this is all coming from. There is an entity called the Islamic Revolutionary Government of Iran that has been the one that has been financing, supporting, and directing this whole scene in the Middle East. So it be it Hezbollah in the north, or the Hamas, or the Houthis, or wherever, all these 7-8 fronts that Israel has been forced to fight and wage a war against, all of them are looking at this day today as part of what they think is a part of their victory. And so we are far from getting anywhere closer to a peaceful resolution of this conflict. We'll actually have to get our hostages back, start to work on that. And we could, of course, have been on this day much earlier, had the Hamas laid down the weapons and released the hostages. We would have been able to prevent much of what has happened in the region, but unfortunately, that is not the case. So we will need to be patient. It is a very complicated day today. It is a very hard day emotionally for Israel, for the families, I think for the whole region. All of us that want peace and stability are holding our hearts with the hope that we'll see our loved ones back. But we also know that when we are releasing mass murderers to out of prisons, we understand what the repercussions may be. We know that Yahya Sinwar was released in the Gilad Shalit deal, and we know what he's responsible for. So we are very concerned, and we are looking with apprehension to the future. And so this is also a moment for all the international community to come together and to think how we can make sure that peace will prevail in our region instead of this murderous genocidal attempt to destroy the state of Israel.
Peace in the region would be something I think the whole world has wanted. Peace, coexistence, is something people have wanted for a long time. This is certainly an important day, and I think everyone's going to hang tight until we actually hear some words. It's a day to be, I suppose, hopeful, but also really tentative. That empty podium is a little disturbing at this point. Ambassador, we really appreciate you spending time with us. I know we will be speaking again. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So again, as we look at Doha, I'm not trying to overstate the empty podium. I don't want to make any drama here. But there have been, as you certainly heard Margaret Evans talk about, so many starts and stops along this way that until you hear people say it, until you see the hostages, until you hear the silence of guns and jets not firing on the people of Gaza, bombs not dropping on them, it's sometimes hard to believe that any kind of cessation of hostilities will happen. So we're waiting for that. I know Sasha Petrusik, our senior correspondent who's in Jerusalem, is watching this as well. Sasha, that AP report that came out just a few minutes ago saying that the Israeli government is still not saying that a deal has happened. In the Israeli media, are you hearing anything that can shed any light?
Well, Adrian, all day watching the Israeli media, watching the statements from the government, There has been, you almost sense the tension that is behind all of this, and the fact that no one seemed to be 100% sure where exactly this is going. That empty podium that you pointed to, that news conference was supposed to happen, like 2 hours ago? 3 hours ago, actually. That was when it was first announced. It was supposed to start then. The announcement was supposed to come. There was supposed to be a ceasefire, et cetera, and there wasn't. So we have been seeing this now, not just for the past months, but even in these final details in the last little while, and conflicting information from various sources who say different things. Some of them from Israel, some of them Palestinian, some of them directly from Hamas, in fits and starts. And 5 minutes between them, on one hand, you get something saying that Hamas has accepted all of this. 5 minutes later, the Israeli Prime Minister's office rejects that and says, no, we don't know anything about this. Then there's another Israeli source who's saying, yes, they have. So, this has been the situation all afternoon. But the fact that the American government, or rather the incoming American president and a number of officials have said that there is a deal, was what set off everybody and to conclude that, in fact, there was a deal. Now, you're right, we haven't heard the final line from the Israeli government, but throughout this process, they have often been the last ones to formally accept that something has been done and achieved. So perhaps this is just the continuation of that trend, or maybe there's something bigger behind that. We did know that Hamas had made some last-minute demands related to which troops are going to stay along that Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. That seems to have been resolved, because only about half an hour later we heard that there was a deal, but maybe not. So maybe they have gone back to those maps that were holding things up just a little while ago.
Well, in terms of, as we look ahead, because we were speaking previously, Sasha, about Isaac Herzog, Israel's president, speaking with the president of the International Red Cross about the very delicate logistics. Seeing a report here as well from the United Nations, and we spoke with James Elder earlier of UNICEF, that the UN can only deliver as much aid as the conditions on the ground allow for us to do so. The removal, this is a quote from the UN here, the removal of various impediments the UN has been facing, which include restrictions on the entry of goods, lack of safety and security, breakdown of law and order, lack of fuel. All of this plays into what will happen in the next few days if this goes through. Can we remind people here, Sasha, when this release of hostages, if indeed it does happen on Sunday, what do you anticipate happening, when, and with who?
We are expecting, we have been hearing that the first 3 hostages will be 3 women. We don't know exactly who, but that they will be released, and that will kick off the rest of the process, which will then go in groups of 3s and 4s over the next 6 weeks in releasing the rest of these hostages. This is a very specific choreography which is expected to be laid out in the deal once we actually see it. So, when you get that specific, that is part of what's been holding this process up. But probably even more to the point has been resistance from different groups here in Israel. Obviously, resistance to certain conditions in the deal by Hamas. So this has been very, very difficult in that level. But that process of releasing hostages, once it starts, is going to be critical, because every one of those steps is supposed to be accompanied by a counter step on the Israeli side. And if anything doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, it opens the door for either side to step back, step away, put a pause on the ceasefire, perhaps even start fighting again. We don't know. It's very, very unpredictable. And you know, to the point that you were making about aid agencies, I was hearing from Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, the other day, and they're basically saying, yeah, obviously we want this ceasefire to go into effect, but don't expect miracles. It will take months before we can start getting aid back in to the level that it's needed.
Absolutely. Also, don't expect to see a big group of hostages come out all at once. I mean, I think we all remember in November of 2023, that first ceasefire, there was an expectation that there would be an initial phase and then another phase and another phase, and it never really got past that initial phase. It was some six days long, as I understand it. Also, Sasha, just to remind people, yes, we have heard, as Arthur Paul was reading for us, the statement from Donald Trump. Nothing from the Biden White House yet. Usually, if there's going to be a statement from the White House, we get at least a 2-minute warning, and so then we can go to it. But there's no indication that that's happening yet. So I think everyone's waiting for the protocol here to see what, if anything, emerges from Doha. And we will be back with you as soon as we have a little bit more, or if you hear something, just let us know, Sasha.
Just one thing I wanted to point out on the military side. We are hearing that that Israel is moving some of its troops around within Gaza, assuming that this is going to be in preparation for whatever starts to happen with some sort of a ceasefire. And one other thing is that, you know, based on past experience, sometimes the fighting actually gets worse just before a ceasefire, because each side wants to make its point. So just because something is signed, if it is signed tonight, doesn't mean that the fighting is going to stop instantly. It may go right to the last second.
Indeed, and I think people would be wise to keep their eyes on the West Bank as well, just to see what happens there as well. Well, you know, we are talking about Gaza, of course, but the West Bank has had all sorts of terrible spasms in the last 15 months as well. So we'll see what happens there. Sasha Petrusek, thank you. I think an important person to bring in right now is the former Israeli Justice Minister, Yossi Beilin. He's you know, also was the initiator of the Oslo Accords. So, sir, we have spoken several times in the past, and I'm so curious what your reaction is. I don't even know what to call this. To news that a deal has been reached, rumors that it has been reached. I don't know where it sits at this point.
Thank you. No, it is not a matter of rumors. I mean, if the incoming president is declaring that there is an agreement and Israel confirms it, I presume that there is an agreement.
And to that, what are you thinking now about that? How does that sit with you? Relief, obviously, but what else is there?
Yeah, it is a relief, and we waited for this to this moment for long. It has been long overdue, and my prayer is that the people who are alive are healthy enough to enjoy their freedom. I'm not sure.
How do you think this has changed your country?
Well, generally speaking, what happened is that people, I would say, became more modest about the strength of Israel. It has been recuperated by the victory of Israel. No question. I mean, the victory in Gaza, the victory in Lebanon, and the ramifications, what happened in Syria and whatever. But still, the October the 7th, more than a year ago, a year and a quarter ago, made us a little bit more humble.
Angry too? I mean, do you, what's your sense of how people are treating each other within the country right now? And what their political mood is? Is it as divided as it appears looking on from afar?
Regretfully, yes, it is divided. It did not create unity. I mean, there was a unity for a moment, or even a long moment, a few months, but it's over. I mean, we are back to the right and left or whatever divisions we have, religious and non-religious people. And we are back even to the legal revolution, which was suggested in January 2023, and which is devastating. And it is not only devastating, but it also divides us. People like myself will never accept the ideas which are suggested to diminish the power of the judicial arm. And there are those who want the government to actually rule the judges, which is crazy and very non-democratic.
And as someone who has been there through difficult accords and has seen them start and seen their fragility, what would your counsel be about how to bolster any deal here?
I'll tell you something about it. First of all, I believe that if it is signed, and it will be signed tomorrow, it will hold. I don't think that either of the parties will try to breach it in the coming 42 days. The main test, the main question is the following one. 16 days after the signing of the agreement, the parties, of course, they don't meet each other, but through mediators, will negotiate the second phase. The first phase will end after 42 days. And then there is the second phase. The second phase should end by the release of all the rest of the hostages, those who are alive and those who regretfully are not alive, but also in a permanent ceasefire. Now, what does it mean, a permanent ceasefire? Does it mean the end of the war? I presume that for some pundits, this is the case. I mean, a permanent ceasefire is the end of the war. For Netanyahu, it will be very difficult to admit that this is the only interpretation, because the way he is trying to appease the lunatic right in his cabinet is to tell them, you know what, Hamas will breach the agreement. We will have enough excuses to continue the war. The war will not be over. And here, I think, this is the real problem in the whole agreement. I mean, the interpretation to the question of what does it mean, the permanent ceasefire.
Right, huge question. Yossi Beilin, thank you for making time for us. I suspect it's going to be a long night for you. Yossi Beilin is a former Israeli justice minister and the initiator, of course, of the Oslo Accords. Thank you, sir. So
thank you very much.
We did ask Sasha Petrusik if he had news, if he would drop us a line. And of course, so now he does. So we're going to go back to you, Sasha, in Jerusalem. Have you learned something there, my friend?
Yes, there's been a release from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It, first of all, takes credit for pushing back demands that Hamas had, doesn't say exactly what, but related to the Philadelphia corridor, which we've been discussing, that strip of land between Gaza and Egypt that Israel wants to keep a certain number of troops along, that Hamas wants to get rid of Israeli troops. But beyond that, the statement says that there are still several items in the framework of the agreement that have yet to be finalized. So we're not there yet, the Prime Minister's office says. We hope that the details will be finalized tonight, is the final word. So We have noticed this delay in announcing this ceasefire agreement, which by all accounts was agreed to and signed off on. But we were right in noticing that there was something not quite right. And the Prime Minister's office is saying that, yes, there are some things that still need to be resolved. We're not hearing from the other side on this at this point, but presumably there is not agreement on something in the big agreement.
I understand. I think I'm parsing what you're saying there. And, you know, among the things that, just to give people a sense of how big the list it is of what is to be determined, never mind, you know, which hostages come out, when they come out, what condition they will be in, where the troops pull back from, when the guns stop firing, when the bombs are dropped. What happens to Gaza after? You know, the Palestinian Prime Minister has said that Palestinian Authority has to be the one to seize control of the Gaza Strip in Hamas's place. That doesn't seem like something that Israel has agreed to. What sort of discussions have there been, Sasha, about what happens in Gaza the day after? I mean, who runs the police? Who's in charge of Gaza? Any indication of who will take control?
Yeah, that is a huge question, and there's been surprisingly, perhaps frighteningly, little debate on that in Israel, except that the government has insisted that it will not be Hamas. In fact, it has vowed before tonight, it vowed that it would destroy Hamas to the point where it did not exist at all. So as far as Israel is concerned, it won't be Hamas. But who it will be is a very open question. There are elements in the Israeli society and in the Israeli government, in fact, in Netanyahu's own party, who would like to see settlements in Gaza and Israel move back in there with its own people and setting up its own societies, setting up its own communities the way it has in the West Bank, for instance. There are others who have suggested that you know, some sort of international force needs to go in there to do this. But that doesn't seem to have a lot of appeal to really any of the major powers. There's been talk of other Arab countries somehow coming up with someone to run Gaza, but there hasn't really been a take-up on that one either. Of course, there's the Palestinian Authority. That is the organization that runs the West Bank, but it's had its own troubles in the West Bank. It has been, it has not had elections for many years. It's been accused of corruption. So it's not clear that really either Israel or anyone else wants it back into Gaza, where it once won an election many years ago. So, you know, this has been the open question, which may leave Israel is the only one to really be in a position to run those police forces that you mentioned and some of these other things. That is obviously not something that tonight appeals to anybody in Gaza itself. And I'm not sure it appeals to many people in Israel either, because they've seen the danger that brings, how that actually may make the situation worse, not to mention the cost and the expenditures and just the tying up of so many people and other things. In fact, just reading a tweet a few minutes ago by the Israeli military saying that they are now preparing for the implementation of the ceasefire, and the name they've given to this mission is Wings of Freedom. So they're obviously, I think, referring to the hostages. But I think there's a lot of people in the military here who would also like to be out of Gaza in this kind of role, which has cost more than 800 soldiers in the fighting over the last 15 months.
And the death toll in Gaza is still something that is far from clear. I think the last horrible number was something like 45,000, but there were some concerns that there are bodies in Gaza that are still under the rubble or buried in the road, and people haven't been able to get an accurate accounting of that. So there's a lot of terrible work yet to be done. Sasha, thank you for this. Sasha was just explaining that there had been some information from the Prime Minister's office that there were still some details to work out. Our producer, Irvin, just got a note from a contact within the Prime Minister's office. And effectively, the translation is, in light of Prime Minister Netanyahu's firm stance, Hamas, quote, caved in at the last minute on its demand to change the deployment of forces along the Philadelphia axis. However, there are still several sections left open in the outline. We hope the details will be finalized tonight. Presumably tonight, meaning tonight in the Middle East. It is 7 hours ahead in Jerusalem, 9 hours ahead in Qatar. Doha, Qatar is where that picture you're looking at is right now. That is that podium that has remained empty for a few hours. We were anticipating some sort of statement. It may yet come, but the patience of the world has been horribly tested over the last 50 months. It is being tested again. They need to get this right. So let's turn now to CBC's Paul Hunter in Washington to talk about, why this is happening right now. Did Joe Biden get this done after all these months of diplomacy because this is effectively the deal as we understand it that he put forward in May? Or is this the Trump factor? Is it the secret sauce of them working together? What's your analysis, Paul?
How about all of the above,
Okay.
Adrian? And I would just note, you talk about keeping an eye on Doha. I think we've just lost the feed, but for the past little while, there's been a shot up from the White House where the presidential lectern has been set up in the foyer right inside the front doors off of Pennsylvania Avenue. Word seems to be that Joe Biden is waiting for the Qataris to speak first from the podium that you've been watching. So we may hear from Joe Biden to answer directly some of the points that you raise shortly. And look, I think I would just preface it by saying that I don't mean to be negative here, but I think there's still a believe it when we see it kind of aspect. I know you've been emphasizing that in your coverage. We've been to the brink many times on this, haven't we? I think that bears repeating. All of that said, look at it this way, Adrian.
Oh, hang on a second, Paul. Just suddenly, I'm only interrupting because there's more activity in that room than I've seen in a couple hours. So either we're about to hear that everybody should go home for a bit or something's about to happen. So keep talking and I'll interrupt you if we need to.
Feel free to interrupt.
Indeed.
Look at it this way, though. The first group of hostages to be released, if this deal is approved, would happen Sunday. The last full day, as I understand it anyway, on Sunday, the last full day of the Joe Biden presidency. You noted, I think, the basis for this deal was the proposal the Biden administration put out there in May, right? And it being derailed in different turns by Hamas and by Israel, but that's the groundwork for what we're seeing today. Fruition for Joe Biden literally as his presidency comes to an end. He wanted this a lot, and now here it is. That said, there are all kinds of caveats, right? We don't know if this will lead to a permanent ceasefire. That falls to Donald Trump and his likely Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who, by the way, is testifying today at his confirmation hearing on Capitol Hill. We do know, remarkably, in this day and age of intense polarization in U.S. politics, we do know that the Biden and Trump teams were indeed working together on this, hand in glove effectively, for some time. Rubio even made reference to that at his confirmation hearing this morning. And there is reporting that even though the basis was the Biden team's proposal back in May, even with that, reporting is the Trump team played a key role in getting this to the finish line. The two teams, Biden's and Trump's, literally in the same room at the same time on this. But read the finish line. Again, to underline, technically that has not yet been passed. The deal still needs approval, despite all the positive signals, and the verbal agreement that we're to understand has come from both sides. Hundreds, some reporting up to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Sasha was talking about that, I believe. 250 of them serving life sentences? Like, who's on that list? How will regular Israelis react when those names come out, right? Bottom line, though, Adrian, a remarkable, relief-filled moment, not only for the hostages and their families, for Palestinians in Gaza, and the Biden administration, which had pushed so hard for this for so long.
Okay, Paul, tell you what, you keep an eye on that White House podium. We'll keep an eye on the Doha podium, and perhaps we'll hear from both soon. We're going to go back now to London because that's where senior international correspondent Margaret Evans is. Margaret, what's in your mind right now?
Well, as Paul was saying, Adrian, no real surprise here because we have been here so many times before. You know, everything that they're negotiating in this first phase, it's supposed to be 3 phases, will have a domino effect. So, you know, a lot of people will be wondering in terms on both sides because each side accuses the other. Hamas accuses the Netanyahu government. The Netanyahu government accuses Hamas of being the ones to scupper things. We don't really know. Both sides are briefing the other. But there are real sticking points and bottom lines that we know both sides have. Israel needs to be able to reassure its citizens that it can provide security for its citizens living next to Gaza. And we heard from the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a speech yesterday saying that their understanding is that Hamas is managing to recruit militants as quickly as they are being killed by the Israelis. So that will have Israelis giving, you know, pause, and especially the people opposed to this agreement in Israel. From the Hamas point of view, they want their people to be able to return home. They want to get the Israeli army out because they will want to reconstitute themselves. And a reminder that they are, in fact, considered a terrorist organization by many governments in the world, including our own. But they are also have been in the past a social and political force in the Gaza Strip. And there is this huge uncertainty that you and Sasha were talking about earlier in terms of what the future is for Gaza. That's not even going to be discussed until phase 3 of this 3-pronged deal. So I'm not surprised that there are delays. I think we were all kind of thinking if there were going to be delays tonight, they might actually come, you know, and not tonight, they'd come tomorrow when the Israeli cabinet has to meet with this. But there's not much to do at this point, but wait and see. Of course, it becomes increasingly cruel when we see the images of Palestinians in Gaza already celebrating, and people, the Israeli families of hostages waiting in Tel Aviv and Hostages Square, getting ready to be happy that at least some of those hostages are being released. So it's hard to imagine what they must be feeling right now. It's, you know, a tense moment at the best of times, but these delays make it much more difficult for people in terms of the emotion because, you know, if this process begins, when it begins, there will be emotions pouring out.
Hearts have been broken again and again and again in both Israel and Gaza, certainly in the West Bank. You're right about that. I remember, Margaret, at the time when we were both posted there, someone at one point told us that optimism in the region was a little bit like nausea in the sense that it comes and goes in waves, and which is a bit heartbreaking to realize. Can I ask you about Hamas for a moment in terms of its capabilities? What happens a lot of times is if you report in the region, you get alerts on your phones when certain things are happening, when there are air raid sirens going off, when rockets are being fired, you get a little map, it shows you where it's happening. That has not stopped in the 15 months of the war. What is your understanding of Hamas's capabilities still? Because it's not... Certainly the idea of Hamas isn't finished, but the practicality of Hamas, the weaponry of Hamas has not been eliminated.
That's right. Although, you know, there's no doubt that this is a campaign that has hurt them hard. It's taken out key military commanders. But Hamas is also used to fighting, you know, in an urban jungle. That's kind of how you would describe Gaza before we've seen so much of it destroyed. So the way that it operates is not close to how a traditional army operates. And so you would expect, in a sense, to see it continuing to function in that kind of urban jungle way. In terms of recruitment, that's not surprising because the Palestinians have been devastated by this past year, and they don't see a horizon beyond this. The Israelis don't want to connect what happened in Gaza to the occupation, to the situation in Gaza. The siege that it's been under all these years. The Israelis will say, well, we pulled out of Gaza, but they still effectively had control of its borders, of the sea, etc. So young Palestinians in Gaza who don't see a horizon, a potential, Palestinian state in their future, or at least self-determination, are easy targets for this kind of recruitment. That said, there is a lot of anger amongst Palestinians in Gaza with Hamas for taking them to this edge. Many people do blame them. They say they too, lots of the people that we've heard speaking in Gaza in recent days have said, we want Hamas to agree to this as well. People, the vast majority of them, just want to get back to their homes. Hamas will be hoping, in a sense, that it can reconstitute a little bit during this phase. That is undoubted. They have controlled Gaza within the parameters that we've just been talking about at a place under siege, essentially, for a long time. And their rivals in Fatah, who control the Palestinian Authority in the occupied territories in the West Bank. We're seeing everybody talk about, the Israelis saying it can't be the Palestinian Authority who takes over in Gaza. So who is it then? And people tend to forget that one of the reasons Hamas was able to maintain the grip that it has maintained over the years ahead of this war was because the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu was allowing funding, money to get through the Egyptian border into Gaza to help fund and strengthen Hamas at the expense of Fatah, which runs the Palestinian Authority, because it wanted that rivalry between the two organizations to exist. And that's fairly well documented. So it's a confused picture when you're talking about who's going to lead the Palestinians. I think that Hamas will just be hoping to come out of this standing on some level, but nobody's really expecting that they're going to be the ones that are handed the keys to a ruined land. That is still a huge, huge problem. In a sense, that's what's happening now, is you see this negotiation, which is allowing, people to push that question, which has been at the heart of the conflict for decades, to the side in order to get out of this terrible, terrible phase that we're in.
It so often seems that this is a region that operates in triage mode. And that is certainly what's happening today. Margaret, thank you for that analysis. We'll be back in touch with you. Margaret talked about the ruined land of Gaza. How do you get aid into Gaza? Well, as we understand it, both Egypt and Jordan have been stocking humanitarian aid in preparation for a surge of it, if you will, under a ceasefire and hostage deal. It's in El Arish, which is in Egypt, and that's the place that will be used to get all that aid in. Certainly, we have seen. I had the privilege of being on an aid flight, dropping aid into Gaza, and then on a flight retrieving wounded Palestinians from an airstrip in El Arish in Egypt, just adjacent to Gaza. It is a huge airstrip. There is the capacity there to get aid across the border when they're able to do it. So we think officials from the United States, Egypt, Israel will be meeting in Cairo tomorrow to discuss operations for the surge. So while we wait for the negotiators to tell us what is happening, you've got several tracks going on here now. The Israeli military is discussing where to pull back from. You have Israel's president meeting with the head of the International Red Cross for the logistics to get the hostages out. Who comes? Where are they? How do you make the transfer from Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad into the safe hands of the Red Cross. And there is this discussion that will be happening in Cairo about how you get aid in. So this is a very delicate and dangerous dance. And as certainly Paul and Sasha and Margaret have all made the point, the days between the announcement of a ceasefire and the implementation of a ceasefire are always very dangerous. And so it would be fantastic to say that this, whatever we hear from whatever microphone, represents the end of violence. It will not. It is not the end of the war. It is the beginning of a pause that hopefully leads to something more foundational. While we look, I know you're getting tired of this shot. We are too, because we want something to happen there, but this is entirely out of our control. Again, this is Doha, Qatar, waiting for the negotiators to come out. But while we wait, let's go to Mohamed Abou-Nimer, who is a professor of peace and conflict resolution at American University. You're in Washington, sir, and as we wait, I know it's frustrating, but I wonder what your initial reaction was. I don't anticipate that it was a surprise because people have been talking about it for quite some time, but what goes through you when you hear that a ceasefire might be happening?
Thank you. I mean, as you indicated also in your last summary here, it's finally we have something more serious than the past few months, and I think it's very important that we get to the point of implementation as fast as possible. But this is a relief in a first reaction. Finally, we are in a point where the intensity of the bombardment, the intensity of the shelling on the Gaza, and to provide food, water, aid relief, medical relief to thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians that has been delayed for more than it should be. And I think that's the main thought came on my mind in the beginning, and also the hope that this will stick, and the Israeli government and Hamas both will be serious enough and committed enough to indeed go through the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 of this proposed agreement.
Sir, your specialty is peace and conflict resolution. I can't imagine anything more important in this region. Do you see a world in which there is peace there? Like that kids can go to school and not be afraid, whether it's Gaza, the West Bank, or Israel?
Of course, we've been working for in this field for over 40 years or 38 years, and with the hope that the small pockets of peaceful relations and peaceful existence can be expanded in that area, in that region. And I think what it takes political leadership on both sides, particularly on the Israeli side these days, to be sincere and committed to sign an agreement that will finally ensure their security as well as the Palestinian community security. I mean, what we learned from this war, which is exactly what we learn from every war, that violence and bombardment, as even if it gets to the level of genocide or ethnic cleansing, it will not solve a conflict. It will give us maybe a few years of calm, but again, without addressing the issue of two-state solution, statehood for the Palestinian and secure state for Israel and Palestine, this conflict will continue to be alive. What we need, hopefully, that's what we're all wishing right now, is that this ceasefire will translate into a longer and more permanent ceasefire, and it will allow the sides to move into a more serious negotiation regarding the two-state solution that has been both by the U.S. as well as by United Nations, by European Union, all the major international players emphasizing that this should be the next step.
Mohammed, we were speaking with our correspondents about control of Gaza. Who becomes in charge of Gaza? I know it's very early in this process. It hasn't even really begun, but we can't pretend that there aren't next day conversations happening. What seems to you the most likely reasonable reality in Gaza for who's in charge of the police, who coordinates the paying of salaries?
I mean, Gaza was run between 1993 and 2006 by the Palestinian Authority. And from 2006 or 7 until 2023 was run by Hamas, who basically won the election and controlled that mechanism, that system. And I don't think there is a way that Gaza can be controlled by the Egyptian or by the Israeli or by any international force. And I think Israel have realized that. Everybody has realized that. So right now, I think what they're looking at is some form of a committee with the Palestinian Authority and other local Palestinian leaders in Gaza. And that committee need to be formed. And I think the Egyptian
Mohammed,
and
forgive
Hamas
me, I have to interrupt you, sir. Finally, we're going to hear something from Doha. Forgive me, we need to listen into this.
No worries.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بوصول طرفي النزاع في قطاع غزة يسر دولة قطر وجمهورية مصر العربية والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية الإعلان عن نجاح جهود الوساطة المشتركة بوصول طرفي النزاع في قطاع غزة إلى اتفاق بشأن تبادل الأسرى والرهائن للأشقاء الفلسطينيين في قطاع غزة. وأود في البداية أن أشكر شركائنا في جمهورية مصر العربية والولايات المتحدة الأمريكية وعلى وجه الخصوص مبعوث الرئيس الأمريكي المنتخب للشرق الأوسط السيد ستيف ويتكوف ومنسق شؤون الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا في مجلس الأمن القومي الأمريكي السيد بريت ماجيرك على جهودهم التي أسهمت.
So forgive me, we don't have translation on this. I understand only that he's talking about certainly the Americans and negotiators. Until we get accurate translation here, Mohammed, I'm just going to go back to you. I don't know if you heard anything of what he just said there.
I'd like to express my deepest thanks and gratitude to our brothers from the Arab Republic of Egypt.
We do
and
have
His
translation,
Excellency
forgive me.
Minister Hassan Rashad, who have contributed and made serious efforts in collaboration with their Qatari partners in order to make this deal a success. With the approval of both sides and the negotiators on this deal in order to finalize all executive measures for tonight, and after that we will be taking all the internal measures, the Israeli government will be taking the internal measures, after which the agreement will enter into effect on Sunday, January 19th. The exact timing will be identified later. The phase 1 of the agreement will go on for 42 days, and it will include a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces to the east away from populated areas. Israeli forces will then be positioned along the Gaza border, and which will allow for the swap of prisoners as well as the swap of remains and the return of the displaced people to their residences. This will also facilitate the travel of wounded and sick people in order to receive treatment. Phase 1 also includes an increased flow of relief and humanitarian aid to all parts of the Gaza Strip, as well as the rehabilitation of hospitals, health centers, bakeries, and allowing the entry of fuel and civil defense equipment, as well as basic necessities for displaced people who lost their houses as a result of the war. In phase 1, Hamas will be releasing 33 Israeli captives, including civilian women and female recruits, as well as children, elderly people, as well as civilian ill people and wounded, in return for a number of prisoners who are being held in Israeli prisons. Regarding phases 2 and 3, the details will be finalized during the implementation of phase 1. The state of Qatar reaffirms the necessity of both sides committing to the implementation of all 3 stages of the agreement in order to prevent civilian bloodshed and in order to shield our region from the consequences of this conflict and ensure that we have lasting peace in the region. Qatar will continue its joint efforts with the Arab Republic of Egypt and the United States of America to ensure that all sides are following through with their commitments and engagements and ensure that all three stages will be implemented. We look forward to seeing regional and international efforts coming together in order to assist with relief and humanitarian aid and supporting the United Nations in its attempts to enter aid into the Gaza Strip. Qatar will spare no effort to offer help to the families in the Gaza Strip and doing everything that's necessary to alleviate the suffering of the residents of the Strip. Since October 8th, we in the state of Qatar saved no effort with the constant under the constant and watchful eye of His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. We worked day and night in order to reach this moment. And since our mediation efforts succeeded last November to guarantee the release of 109 hostages in return for a number of Palestinian prisoners, we have been working continuously in order to prevent bloodshed and put an end to the war machine and restore hope for our region in a prosperous future that will allow our people to dream of a better future. For 411 days, meetings and contacts continued with our partners and both sides of the conflict until we reached this long-awaited moment today. However, today begins a responsibility for both sides who will be supported by the international community and the mediators in order to achieve complete success. And this is what we will be focusing on in the coming days and weeks. I would also like to express our thanks to all our partners in the region and internationally for their support to our efforts all the way until we reach this deal. And in conclusion, I would also like to remind our brothers in the Gaza Strip that Qatar will continue to offer support to our brothers in Palestine and that this happens under the close watch and the watchful eye of His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, day and night, hour by hour, and minute by minute. We would like to tell them we give thanks to Allah for bringing us to this moment today, and hopefully this will be the last page in the days of the war. We would also like to call upon all sides to fully commit to all the articles of this agreement and to continue implementing these procedures and measures in accordance with the agreement. The state of Qatar will continue working jointly with its partners in order to make sure that this deal is implemented in full and that calm returns to the Gaza Strip in a sustainable manner, and we will never give up the people of Gaza. Thank you. First question, Sky News.
Prime Minister Hakim from Sky News. Congratulations. This is a huge moment. You, as you say, have been working on this deal for many months. And the question is, why now? Why this moment? And was it pressure from the incoming Trump administration that got it over the line? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Hilda, for this question. Actually, we've been raising the question of the right moment for the entire period since the collapse of the first phase. But we have seen a momentum that started to build in the last month, and we kept pushing for that, working together very closely with our partners. And I can say that what we have seen from the U.S. in the past few days, seeing a collaboration transcending both administrations, was a clear demonstration for the commitment of the U.S. to reach to that deal. And I really would like to thank both the envoys who are here with us in the last couple of days, and they played a vital role in reaching to this moment. And of course, for us and Egypt, this is something that we are a stakeholder in that conflict, that we have to do it and we have to help and support. But we have seen the steps that's been taken recently from the U.S. has yielded to this moment.
CNN.
Thank you very much indeed, and to Steve Witkoff, who's Becky Anderson from CNN. Congratulations to you, and to Steve Witkoff, who is also here in the room. How much confidence do you have that the deal will progress beyond phase one, sir?
Well, we have faith, Becky, that brought us to this moment, and I think that's the most important part, that we are committed. We will continue to do everything we can, everything possible, together with our partners to ensure that this deal is implemented as it's agreed, and this deal will bring us peace, hopefully, at the end of it. I believe that it all depends on the parties of the agreement and acting in good faith in that agreement in order to ensure that no collapse happening to that deal.
Can I just follow up? What mechanisms are in place to ensure that neither side breaks the ceasefire?
There is a follow-up mechanism that Egypt, Qatar, and US are going to handle. It will be placed in Cairo, and this follow-up actually will be a joint team from the three countries that will monitor the implementation of the agreement, and everything is being agreed upon and will be in place hopefully on the day of the execution.
Thank you.
Reuters.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Congratulations, Andrew Mills from Reuters. Can you talk a little bit more about this follow-up mechanism? If elements of the agreement put in place tonight are violated, what will happen? Who is it that is going to report and that a violation has happened? And how will that violation be communicated to the parties, the world, the guarantors of this agreement? Thank you.
Well, this is what I have just mentioned to Becky. There will be a follow-up mechanism that all the parties will be placed in Egypt, and they will follow up the implementation of the agreement. There will be a reporting mechanism for any violation, and those violations will be addressed at a very early stage. Look, we expect from the parties to adhere to the agreement. We expect the parties to stay committed to what they have committed themselves to in that agreement. But we know that these kind of agreements are very complex and will have some issues down the line. And we are ready, and we will stay committed to address those issues ahead of time.
And Prime Minister, just as a follow-up, the last truce that was in place in November 2023 did fall apart on the 8th day. What has changed in this agreement that will ensure that this has less likely to fall apart than that agreement was?
Well, the agreement on November was to build the momentum in order to lead for a longer-term agreement, which we have today. But unfortunately, the agreement in November was very transactional, so it was like a day by day. But this agreement has a clear mechanism for the first 42 days, and there's a clear mechanism to negotiate phase 2 and 3, and all the details of the agreement will be published in the next couple of days once the details are finalized.
السؤال الرابع والأخير قناة الجزيرة العربية.
Your Excellency, Adnan Bourina from Al Jazeera. Question number 1. Do you think that this agreement will lead to a permanent ceasefire? In other words, do you believe the guarantees are strong enough to ensure that Israel will commit to all articles of the agreement? Question 2. Between today and Sunday, what will the situation be like in the Gaza Strip? And question 3, if you allow me, what contributed to the success of the mediation this time around, and what did Qatar offer this time, and what will Qatar's role be like in the implementation of the agreement? Truth be told, you had me lost because I was focused on question number 1. Can you please go over the questions again? Question number 1, do you believe that this time the deal will lead to a permanent ceasefire? All right, wait here and then you'll ask the other questions later. Regarding the implementation of this agreement, first off, like I said, the implementation depends upon the parties as well as the goodwill of the parties, and this is what we are hoping. Of course, regarding the guarantees, the best guarantee would be the commitment of all parties to the agreement and the articles of the agreement. In addition, there are guarantees provided by the guarantors and the mediators of this agreement that will guarantee the continuation of negotiations throughout the first phase, while we wait for phase 2, where we will be announcing the complete withdrawal and the end of the war. A series of measures will be taken in the next few days in order to reinforce and shield this agreement. Between today and Sunday, when the agreement enters into force, what will the situation be like in the Gaza Strip? Of course, we ask that the situation be calm between today and Sunday. However, the parties recognize that the agreement requires a couple of days in order for its articles to be implemented correctly and for the engagements therein to be honored. And we hope that over the next few days, there will not be any aggressions or any military operations. Last question, what is it that ensured the success of the mediation efforts this time? What role did Qatar play, and what will Qatar's role be like in the future? As I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, it all goes back to the parties of the agreement. We in Qatar and our partners in the Arab Republic of Egypt, at the end of the day, we are mediators. We are trying to bring viewpoints closer together and bridge any gaps between the two sides. Of course, the success of the agreement depends on a number of factors, and there are a number of variables that are happening around this. I cannot go into the details. However, as I stated earlier, in the past few days, there were some serious efforts by all partners. We were all working as a single team in order to come up to the agreement that was reached today. We had back-to-back meetings over the past 4 days. We were communicating continuously at those meetings in the presence of the Qatari delegation, the Egyptian delegation, as well as the American delegation, and of course the presence of the two parties to the conflict.
Going to Washington.
Israel and Hamas. More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families. The elements of this deal were what I laid out in detail this past May, which was embraced by countries around the world and endorsed overwhelmingly by the UN Security Council. The deal is structured in 3 phases. Phase 1 will last 6 weeks. It includes a full and complete ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli forces from all the populated areas of Gaza, and the release of a number of hostages held by Hamas, including women and elderly and the wounded. And I'm proud to say Americans will be part of that hostage release in Phase 1 as well. And the Vice President and I cannot wait to welcome them home. In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And during Phase 1, the Palestinians can also return to their neighborhoods in all the areas of Gaza. And the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will begin, and the innocent people can have a greater access to these vital supplies. You know, during the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get Phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait and the President of Egypt, and we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. Then, when Phase 2 begins, there will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza, and the temporary ceasefire will become permanent. And finally, Phase 3, any final remains of hostages who have been killed will be returned to their families, and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement and the whole ending the war. You know, those of you who have followed the negotiations can attest The road to this deal has not been easy. I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States. Hamas's longtime leader, Sinwar, was killed. Hamas's strongest supporter, Iran, launched attacks on Israel. And those attacks failed after my administration organized a coalition of nations to stop them. And after I ordered the U.S. ships and planes to come to Israel's defense, we also shaped Israel's strong and calibrated response, destroying Iran's air defenses, but avoiding an escalatory cycle of an all-out war. The United States also organized a coalition of 20 countries to stand up to attacks by the Houthis, including their missile attacks in Israel. Then, Hezbollah, another of Hamas's strongest backers, was significantly weakened on the battlefield, and its leadership was destroyed. With our support, Israel negotiated a ceasefire with them, and after that, Lebanon finally elected a new president who's not beholden to Hezbollah, and he can begin a new chapter for the Lebanese people. All told, these developments in the region, which the United States helped to shape, changed the equation. And so now, the terror network that once protected and sustained Hamas is far weaker. Iran is weaker. Iran is weaker than it's been in decades. Hezbollah is badly degraded. And after more than 15 months of war, Hamas's senior leaders are dead. Thousands of Hamas fighters are dead. And the military formations have been destroyed. With nowhere to turn, Hamas finally agreed to releasing hostages. You know, there was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild. They can look to a future without Hamas in power. You know, the Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. Many peacemakers helped make this deal happen, including an extraordinary team of American diplomats who have worked nonstop for months to get this done. Secretary Blinken led the effort. Secretary Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Bill Burns, John Feiner, Brett McGurk, Amos Hochstein, and the Vice President worked relentlessly as we work to deliver this deal. I'd also note this deal was developed and negotiated under my administration, but its terms will be implemented, for the most part, by the next administration. In these past few days, we've been speaking as one team. This has been a time of real turmoil in the Middle East. But as I prepare to leave office, our friends are strong, our enemies are weak, and there's a genuine opportunities for a new future. In Lebanon, there's an opportunity for a future, free from the grip of Hezbollah. In Syria, a future free from the tyranny of Assad. And for the Palestinian people, a credible pathway to a state of their own. And for the region, a future of normalization, integration of Israel and all its Arab neighbors, including Saudi Arabia. At the G20 in Delhi in September 23, I rallied key countries behind a vision of an economic corridor from India across the Middle East to Europe. That vision can now become a reality. There are risks as well, including ISIS and Iran, even in a badly weakened state, but we're handing off to the next team a real opportunity for a better future for the Middle East. I hope they will take it. Let me close with this. My friend for years in the United States Senate, former Senator George Mitchell, who did so much to forge peace in Northern Ireland, once said about diplomacy, he said, it is a 700 days of failure and 1 day success. 700 days of failure and 1 day success. Well, we've had many difficult days since Hamas began its terrible war. We've encountered roadblocks and setbacks. We've not given up. And now, after more than 400 days of struggle, the day of success has arrived. God bless all the hostages and their families. May God protect the troops of all those who work for peace.
Mr. President, how do you see the future of Gaza now? As you were saying, the implementation of this deal will be in the hands of the next administration, and basically they will shape the future of Gaza. So how do you see this future? And also, how much credit do you give to the Trump team for this deal? Trump is already taking credit for it.
Well, you know, this is the exact framework of the deal I proposed back in May. Exact. And we got the world to endorse it. Secondly, it's America's support for Israel that helped them badly weaken Hamas and its backers and create the conditions for this deal. And thirdly, I knew this deal would have to be implemented by the next team. So I told my team to coordinate closely with the incoming team to make sure we're all speaking with the same voice, because that's what American presidents do. Thank you.
In the, how many Americans will be released when the hostages are being released?
All the exact detail of how many people are being held, how many bodies will be returned and less, will all be forthcoming. All of it, all of it. Thank you.
This deal will hold.
I'm confident. Thank you.
Folks, credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
All right. That is U.S. President Joe Biden alongside Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Vice President Kamala Harris, talking about diplomacy, talking about 700 days of failure, in the words of George Mitchell, he said, his old friend. That's what diplomacy is, and one day of success, and this is the day of success. There is a deal. I'll give you another phrase. Failure is an orphan, and success has many parents. This is a day where you are seeing and hearing from all the parents of this success. Before, you heard from Joe Biden, who made it very clear that the deal that was agreed upon in Qatar is the deal that he put forward, the framework, in May of 2024. He repeatedly said the exact framework. Before that, we heard from Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, who is the Prime Minister of Qatar, who has been fundamental in getting the parties together. Qatar was critical to this. Certainly, there was a mention, you may have heard it go by there, of a man named Steve Witkoff, who was in the room at the time. He is the Trump envoy who was at those negotiations alongside Biden's envoys. This was, according to all who were close to these negotiations, this was a remarkable alchemy, if you will, of an outgoing and incoming administration speaking legitimately with one voice to this end. So, as we understand it, the next few days might be rough, but come Sunday, at a time that is yet to be determined, the release of hostages will begin in phase one. The cessation of violence will begin in phase one. Troops will withdraw. Aid will go in. And over the course of 6 weeks, as the remainder of the hostages come out, this will be a trickle of people. The first hostages to come out will fall under a humanitarian category. So it's people under 19. I think of that baby Kafir Bibas, his second birthday is this Saturday. We don't know if he's alive or dead. His brother Ariel's 5 was also taken hostage along with their parents, Shiri and Yarden. Will they be among those? There are American hostages. There are elderly people. There are remains that no one knows what has happened to them. So you may see some of that in the first few days, but it is critical, from what we've heard from everyone here, that over the course of the 6 weeks of this phase one of this ceasefire, the negotiations will continue. And if it requires 6.5 weeks or 7 weeks or 8 weeks to get to a place where they can initiate phase two, the ceasefire will hold until those negotiations continue. So the expectation is that come Sunday, again, at a time we're not yet aware, when this starts to happen, the guns will fall silent. We will see. The world is counting on this. Clearly, this was very important for President Biden to make it clear he did this. Also very important for Donald Trump to have his inauguration on Monday. He will be able to say just hours ago, people returned to their beds for the first time. My team did that. Certainly expect to hear that from him. There's a lot more analysis of this to come. This is where the rubber meets the road on what happens next. So this is a good time to go to Paul Hunter, who's in Washington, who has been listening to all of this. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Well, a few, Adrian. First of all, how grateful do you think Joe Biden is right now to have this land on his lap, effectively on his third last day in office? He's, as he noted there, he's been working toward this for a very long time, to have this one day where it comes to an end. He is certainly tremendously grateful for. I say comes to an end, but of course it hasn't. He made many reference to this being just, I guess, the beginning of the end, potentially. He did seem to try to put a sense of finality to it, underlining the work that he's put into it, the fact that indeed this is exactly the proposal that his team put forward back in May. But to go back to the Qatari Prime Minister, he used words such as hopeful, that this leads to something permanent, that it depends on the goodwill of the two parties here. So there are a lot of ifs in the days and weeks to come. And that's the thing that comes up that you referenced, that those next steps, getting to a permanent peace. The U.S., and by that I guess I mean the Biden administration at this point, has not only always seen a ceasefire as the first step toward a permanent deal, but really as the only way to get to a permanent deal. A permanent deal would not be the starting point. Nobody ever thought it would, in other words. So this is that first step, right? We talk about the first hostages coming out on Biden's watch on Sunday. The next hostages, living or their remains, will come out on Trump's watch. And so indeed, the rest of the way on this is on the next administration. And there's lots that could derail this. I mean, politically, it's a big moment for Joe Biden. It's a big moment for Trump as well. But then the continued heavy lifting keeps on going on his part. It falls to Trump to maintain this after literally noontime Monday. A lot of people had wondered about the comparisons to the Iranian hostage release on Reagan's first day way back when. Well, this isn't really like that. Some hostages will come out. The rest gradually in batches over time with Trump in office, with continuing talks to maintain peace, to get to peace on a permanent basis. And on that, Adrian, many questions, right? Israel would have to not only pull its soldiers back, but pull them out. It has to be demonstrated that Hamas would be unable to reassert itself in Gaza. We mentioned earlier the credit being given to Trump's team as well as Biden's on getting this through. While Trump has said there'd be hell to pay if a deal wasn't reached, credit seems to be going to his team working with Biden to get to this. And I would add, Trump himself trying to take credit for this today. He's also posting that he wants to use this moment to build on the Abraham Accords, right? Momentum, as it were, to expand the Abraham Pact, signed, of course, during Trump years, normalizing Israel's ties with United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan. Perhaps a suggestion he'd like it to somehow bring the Saudis on board. We'll see. It's a big day. I mean, in this day and age of U.S. politics, I mean, I guess it's not wrong to call it a win-win. Biden gets credit, Trump will get credit, but the workload now shifts to Trump and his team, who, as Biden himself was noting, have been working hand in glove together in the same room to get things to this point.
Indeed. Interesting that you say that. And just so people know, on the right side of your screen, you're watching pictures of Han Yunis in Gaza. Certainly word has spread in Gaza that the ceasefire has happened. There was a moment there where people disappeared from that shot. I'm not sure why, but they've come back. I mean, you're not seeing people sort of celebrating through the streets, possibly because they are completely, utterly exhausted, and all they need is a peaceful night, and they know they're not quite going to get it yet. But someone asked a really important question, Paul, of the Qatari Prime Minister, which is that what's the reporting mechanism? Over this over the 6 weeks as you're negotiating, if someone violates, who do you report to? Who enforces it? Is it your sense that they're not just getting on a plane and saying, okay, we're done, over to you, that they're going to stay on this?
That would, you say, is that my sense? It would be my guess. The stakes are too high. The work that has gone into this to get this to this point, I mean, everybody uses sports metaphors, right? Like get to the finish line that they seem to be at, right? It's no small deal right now to have a ceasefire, and no small deal to get these first waves, I guess, of hostages released. But there is a lot more to be done, right? A lot to get to a permanent ceasefire. And by the way, if I can just add something else, Adrian, you know, we've seen images and we've heard from people inside the Gaza Strip throughout the past many months, but those have been really because of stringers and other people that we have associations with on the inside. Western reporters, the CBC, it's been impossible to get inside, right? So we know that the destruction and the terrible circumstance that is in place there, we only have a degree of knowledge about that. I suspect what we'll find in the next days and weeks as Western journalists get inside Gaza is that it may well be beyond anything that we have imagined in terms of the destruction and the depravity and the need for the aid that will now finally, according to this anyway, start pouring in.
Oh, Paul, I cannot tell you how hard people have been trying to get into, I mean, journalists from CBC in particular have been trying to get into Gaza, and I know we will be banging down the doors and continuing to try. Paul Hunter, thank you very much. As we look at pictures of Han Yunis, I'd also like to go back to the region if we can. We are, of course, trying to get people on the ground in Gaza right now. But in the interim, can we go to Sasha Petrusik in Jerusalem? Reaction, Sasha, to word that this is real now.
There hasn't been much reaction so far, partly because I think that many of the details have been assumed, talked about for some time. There has been a sense of frustration and exasperation, especially among the families of the hostages, but among many people in Israel, that you know, as President Joe Biden had said, as many others have pointed out, this is a deal that's been on the table for so long, and this process could have happened months ago, the families would argue, and it didn't, and there wasn't the willpower. And part of that, they point to the pressure that there's been on on the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, from part of his coalition government, right-wing extremists, two parties in particular, who have effectively this week taken, I guess, credit for the fact that they stepped in the way and prevented exactly this kind of a deal in the past. That pressure is not stopping. So as we look forward, one of the things that I think will be still there, hanging over all of this, is the pressure inside Israel to only go so far and to perhaps pull back from this agreement if there are signs that the other side isn't sticking to it, or maybe even if it is sticking to it. So that is an element that is part of Israeli politics and has always had an influence on what happens in Gaza and what happens in the region over the last number of months. And sometimes some of the analysts here would argue it has taken a front seat, whereas all of these other considerations, including the humanitarian considerations of what's happened in Gaza, have been pushed aside in the interest of getting these particular goals, including perhaps moving settlers back into Gaza, something that was pulled out years ago. So this is an element of Israeli politics that will continue to cast a shadow over this ceasefire deal and have an influence on whether it moves from the first stage to the second stage and to the third stage. And as the Qatari Prime Minister said, whether in fact this could be the last page in this war, or whether this is going to be just another stop in the road, the way that the first ceasefire was way back, more than a year ago.
Indeed, yeah, November of 2023. It's interesting that the Qatari Prime Minister described that one as almost, I think he used the phrase, I'm just looking at it here, sort of transactional. That was different. It only lasted for some 6 days, but the expectation is that this is very different. That the 6 weeks of this first phase will be used to negotiate the second phase, and if they require more time after, like if it isn't done by the end of 6 weeks exactly, they will keep holding the cessation of violence while they negotiate. That is the plan. Let us see. This is a moment for people to breathe, and then certainly on Sunday, when it gets more quiet, definitely to breathe. Sasha, thank you very much. That's Sasha Petrusik in Jerusalem. We've been talking for a long time now about people in Gaza, but also what it must be like for the families of hostages, which is why it's really important for us to bring in Yasmin Magal. She is the cousin of Omar Nutra, who was taken hostage by Hamas militants during their attack on Israel. This is October 7th, 2023. Yasmin, you're in Jerusalem now. Thank you for making time for us. I mean, it's been over 15 months since Omar's abduction, and I know you've been working exceptionally hard for his release. How have you all been holding up?
So Omar was taken alive, and we've been fighting for 14 months, thinking that we have the chance and the hope to get him back alive. But a month ago, we received the news that Omar was killed by the terrorists, and now our fight has changed, and we're fighting in the hope of getting his body back for a proper burial.
It's terrible, and when you say you learned that in December, and here we are, it's not that long after that. Is this day a very mixed day for you then?
Yes, because it is a very difficult shift to make from the hope of hugging him again to the hope of burying him. And I don't wish for anyone to have to hope to bury their loved one. But he deserves a proper burial, and we deserve to have a grave, and the other families deserve to be reunited with their loved ones. So I'm just hopeful that we're on the right path for that.
Also exhausted? Are you completely exhausted?
For sure. Mixed feelings, exhausted. I'm hoping that we can put this all behind us very soon.
How do you feel about your country now? Like, where are you at in terms of the emotions of the last year?
Do you mean Canada or do you mean Israel?
No, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I should be clear. You're Canadian, but you're also an Israeli. So I'm talking about Israel in particular here.
I think that right now is the most hopeful that people have been for over a year. So, I mean, hopefully we'll get them back. And I mean, I feel the hope in the air. So, yeah.
That must feel like an unusual feeling after what everyone's been through the last 15 months. So hope in the air, that sounds pretty extraordinary. Is there anything that you would want Canadians to understand about this moment from your perspective?
I think that a lot of Canadians still don't know that there are still hostages being kept in Gaza, and I mean, that they now might get released. And I mean, this is just such a humanitarian issue. And to keep a family from not knowing if their loved one is dead or alive for 14 months, only for us to find out that Omar was dead this whole time, is just torture. And I mean, we deserve to have him back, and everyone just deserves to have everyone back. And taking people hostage is just such a crime against humanity. And Canadians should be aware of that.
Can you tell me a little bit about Omar?
Of course. Omar was and it's difficult for me to even speak in past tense. I'm not used to that yet.
I'm sorry.
But he was such a people person, and he made a point of including everyone wherever he went. He was the popular kid always, but always made sure that no one is left behind, or no one feels excluded. And he loved cats so much. Stray cats in Israel are everywhere, and he would pay attention everywhere, and he would just pet them and pay attention to them. And he was the same way with people. So many people really think that he was their best friend, and he left so many broken hearts behind. He really didn't deserve this, and we really didn't deserve this.
No. Yeah, Yasmin, thank you for taking the time. I hope the days ahead mean at least some sleep for you. Thank you very, very much.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Yasmin Miguel's cousin, Omar, was taken by Hamas. And as she explained, they learned in December that they thought he was alive all this time, but they learned in December that he had indeed been killed. So at this point, they are waiting to see if his remains come out in that first phase. I should let you know that we are trying to make contact with a young man who is in Gaza outside the Al-Aqsa hospital. You can appreciate that connectivity into Gaza is often terrible. Over the last 15 months, it's been almost impossible, but we're working hard to do that. And we'll get to him at some point, I promise you that. I also really want to head back to Jerusalem now, because we need to speak with Svika Klein. Svika is the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Boy, you've been busy. You are in Jerusalem now, and now that we have some of the details, and really, as a layperson, I look at the details that have been released since May of Biden's initial proposal and over the last few days. They don't look all that different. But what stands out to you in this deal?
So, good evening. I think that most of the details, as we heard from President Biden and from others, are very similar. I mean, there are small nuances. For instance, just in the past few hours, the Israeli Prime Minister's office kind of released some sort of background information saying that at the last second, Hamas asked for certain details to be changed regarding the Philadelphia corridor, basically meaning the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, which is a very strategic area where Israel, took over because of the amount of ammunition that was brought into Gaza through Egypt, and it wasn't being monitored.
Interesting. Can you give us, we are so far away, although people are certainly connected with what is happening there, a sense of how you think Israel has changed over the last 15 months?
Wow. I think both, I think it's speaking to you in Canada, I think both Israel's changed, and I think the Jewish people around the world have changed, definitely in Canada. Israelis, we had a period of being very united and very kind of close to each other, regardless of political opinions. And then now it's kind of like a roller coaster, because people are for this deal or against it. Obviously, everyone wants to see the hostages return. There are those that are kind of worried that release of all these, prisoners, people who killed, Palestinians who killed Israelis will just be released. So it's really a roller coaster of emotions, of your stomach hurting and your head wanting something to happen, but your stomach says otherwise. And I think a sense of there was a sense of insecurity. I feel like now in the past few months, Israelis feel a bit more pride, to be Israeli, and feel like they earned respect. But I think many families just are yearning for this to end. Mm-hmm. Not only the families of the hostages, the amount of Israelis who are, in reserve duty, who have regular jobs, families just want to go home and to continue with their normal, regular lives.
It's all anybody ever wants, right? That your kids go to school and that they come back okay. And that's been so elusive in that region is just one of the heartbreaks of the region. I'm wondering.
I would say that, except for the extremes, and the extremes unfortunately are a lot louder than the vast majority that wants this normal life. And let's hope that these extremes will be eliminated as possible.
Yeah, extremes. Yeah, there are extremes in every society. I'm curious, Svika, as we watch. So I know there's a lot of details we don't know yet in terms of the precise timing. But for you, what are you watching for next? What will be your barometer of this is working, this is not working? I'm not sure how we read what happens in the next 6 months. 6 weeks, sorry.
Right. So 100% right. So, I mean, first of all, the goal would be for these 6 weeks to go to end safely while nobody, does anything against the treaty. But there's so many things that could go wrong, and hopefully they don't. And this is only the first phase, as you mentioned, at the beginning of this report. So, I mean, we're just talking now about 33 hostages out of 98. So there's still like a long way to go, and hoping that we could actually get to the second. There are many Israeli politicians, as one of your reporters mentioned, that want the IDF to return to fight right after this, even though diplomatically it seems like it's almost impossible for Israel to actually do that. And also the Israeli government has to approve this deal as a democratic country, and there are those who are against it. I think possibly, there may be those in the opposition that would help the government, pass this, but there's also a very fragile political situation going on.
Indeed. Svika, thank you very, very much. I know you're going to be writing all night long, but I'm sure we will talk. Yeah, you will. We'll be talking again. That's Svika Klein, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. We need to go now to CBC's Chris Reyes, who is in New York, tracking official reaction to the ceasefire in the United States and the United Nations. So, Chris, nice to see you. What are you hearing?
So, Adrian, as you know, we were waiting for official reaction. There were a lot of empty podiums that we were watching. And shortly after the Qatari Prime Minister spoke, as he was taking questions, we heard from President Joe Biden. Have a listen to what he said.
More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families. There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. And this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild. They can look to a future without Hamas in power.
And, Adrian, at the end of that statement, he took a few questions, and the very last one was whether he or Donald Trump should take credit for this deal. He turned around and asked if that was a joke. It's really interesting, sort of the very different ways that the two presidents take credit. We heard a lot from President Biden talk about that this is the deal that he negotiated back in May, that they worked to get support for that deal here at the United Nations, at the Security Council, where they were able to pass a resolution based on that deal. He talked about bringing in Trump's team to be part of the negotiation, knowing that they would have to take it over at the end of his administration, but again, didn't want to answer the question whether it was his team or Trump's team that should take credit. But I should tell you what really got the ball rolling with all of this live coverage was a post on social media from Donald Trump, even before we heard from the Qatari Prime Minister. This is what he posted just 2 hours ago on Truth Social. We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you. He followed that post with another lengthy post taking full credit for this deal, talking about his Middle East envoy who was there in that room with the Qatari official, Steve Witkoff. And so, again, we haven't heard directly from Donald Trump yet, but he certainly took credit before anybody else on social media. So it'll be interesting to see what he says when he faces cameras. And we know he's only 5 days away from officially moving into the White House.
Indeed. I gather we're also hearing from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. What's he saying?
Absolutely. So the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is here at the United Nations in New York. We were told by his press secretary that he was waiting until the Qatari officials confirmed this deal before he spoke. We know that there's been a lot of work done here at the UN to address the humanitarian situation in Gaza. He has often taken the podium, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, to talk about the situation in Gaza being on the brink of disaster, of being at the edge of the abyss. Here's what he said earlier today.
I call on all relevant parties to uphold their commitments and ensure that this deal is fully implemented. From the outset of the violence, I've called for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Our priority now must be to ease the tremendous suffering caused by this conflict. The United Nations stands ready to support the implementation of this deal and scale up the delivery of sustained humanitarian relief to the countless Palestinians who continue to suffer.
And, their top priority is really to get into the region as soon as possible, something that they've had a lot of difficulty doing in the last few months.
Chris, thank you for that. I'm so sorry to interrupt. We finally have a line through to Gaza. I think we definitely need to go there because we want to connect with freelance reporter Abu Bakr Abed. Outside the Al-Aqsa Hospital, I know you're located roughly in the center of the Strip. It is so nice to see you. Abu Bakr, what's the mood like where you are?
Well, it's a really, really amazing feeling for every single one here, particularly for children, because every single one here in Gaza has a tragedy to narrate. And our pain had been compounded in every single day during the past 14 months. Everyone is celebrating here. Everyone has been celebrating since the news of the ceasefire popped up for them. And at the same time, the really important thing here is that we will not see more funerals here inside the hospital. The tears of the mothers will not be seen anymore. And the wailing over the bodies of loved ones will also not be watched any time again. So the traumatic and the shattering picture that has been painted over the past 14 months now will change to a more beautiful and more hopeful picture for every single one here in Gaza, because all those who have been internally displaced will now have the time and have the chance to go to their houses in the north, and also will have the time to find peace, to embrace freedom, to embrace dignity and comfort. And even when we talk about the humanitarian situation that had been deteriorating also over the course of this genocide, now it will get better. So a lot of the children, it's just a huge relief and respite for everyone here, a respite from the incessant horrors that have been unfolding, that people have been going through, and every single day, even until the very last moment, Israel has been bombarding Gaza reportedly with 10 people have been killed. So it's just a big relief, a big respite, and the happiness is literally indescribable. So everyone is happy, everyone is waiting because everyone wants to gather with their separated families, because not all families are together. And at the same time, everyone wants to return to their houses because they have literally been through a lot and through unimaginable hardships every single day, every single moment. So we hope that even during the next 2 days, until the ceasefire gets underway, there will be no more attacks, there will be no more killings at all, and that everyone in Gaza will feel happy and feel human just one more time again, and this horror will end forever, and this ceasefire will secure permanent peace, love, and dignity and tranquility for everyone trapped in the territory.
Abu Bakr, I don't know if you can still hear me. You know, you're right. Everyone there has been through hell, and that includes you. You tweeted at one point, "The happiness is literally eternal. Gaza's streets are erupting. The tears of joy, tears of everyone. The joy. I lost the words." How have you managed to stay safe? Like, what has your life been like, Abu Bakr?
Well, really, there had been no safety at all. Even until this very moment, I still have that sense of, fear and panic inside my heart. And I cannot really, sit with my family and have that dinner or even enjoy our time because there are still 2 days left until the ceasefire is officially announced. And it was pure horror, but we really stuck together and we faced all this horror, all these hardships and difficulties over the course of time. This is our belief because I always said to myself since the start of this genocide as a young man, only 22 years old, that I wanted to emerge from this genocide with hope. If I survive, I'm gonna really spread hope all over, wherever I go. That is the belief that I have inside myself. That is the mentality that I've been instilled into. Even every single one in Gaza has the same story. So there was no safe zone. Even when we talk about it in much more detail, we're here and Deir al-Balah. Deir al-Balah is supposed to be a humanitarian safe zone, but it has been fiercely attacked over the course of time. And just yesterday, an entire family was wiped out. We're talking about more than 13 people have been killed in that overnight strike. So you cannot tell me. So now the joy is the eternal, the sense of quintessential euphoria is really embodies the time of sleeping without the buzzing sounds of the drones, without the continuous hovering of warplanes, without the feeling of panic inside my heart. So I can really get up next morning, exchange smiles with my family, and everything I can do, everything that can give me hope, that can give me happiness. Now I can feel human again. So I really managed it because I had belief and I had hope, and I will always have hope, like everyone in Gaza. And we will, of course, rebuild Gaza again, and we will live the life that we want, apart from the occupation, apart from the subjugation, and all the horrors that we've been subjected to over the course of the genocide.
What is it you want to do with your life? What is your big dream?
Well, everyone knows that I was a football reporter and commentator before the war.
Oh, I'm so sad we lost him. I can tell you, Abu Bakr Abed absolutely is a football fan. And if I know him, I think he wants, like, Gaza FC to be, he wants to be on that team and he wants it to be a real thing. So I hope he's okay. We'll just make sure and let you know. I really want to bring in at this point my colleague Andrew Nichols, who has been furiously, I can see him just on the edge of frame here, furiously tracking international reaction. There's a lot, eh?
There is a lot. Just a couple, because I know there's a lot going on, but we have reaction, for instance, from the Egyptian President El-Sisi, who says that more than a year with Egyptian, Qatari, and American mediation with this agreement, I stress the importance of accelerating the introduction of urgent humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza to confront the current catastrophic humanitarian situation, and going on to say that Egypt will be it's faithful to its pledge, a supporter of just peace, a loyal partner in achieving it. We're We also heard from Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, saying after months of devastating bloodshed and countless lives lost, this is the long overdue news that the Israeli and Palestinian people have desperately been waiting for. They have, borne the brunt of this conflict triggered by the brutal terrorists of Hamas who committed the deadliest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust on October 7th, 2023, and then going on to support the two-state solution. We should mention, Adrian, the other big story that we're following in this country is, of course, the First Ministers meeting in Ottawa. And so we have put in calls to Ottawa to get reaction from Global Affairs Canada. Well, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister, Melanie Joly, are in that First Ministers meeting right now, focused very much on the threats from Donald Trump and 25% tariffs being threatened on all Canadian goods on day one, on Monday. So that may explain some of the reason why we haven't heard Canadian reaction yet, but I'm sure we will soon.
And we're keeping an eye on cameras that are in the room. Often we see the cameras setting up before we can actually, someone is sitting in those chairs. But when the cameras start setting up, you know something's coming. So there's a solid chance. There you go. That's exactly what we're talking about. There is a solid chance we will hear from some of the premiers or the cabinet ministers or the Prime Minister at some point. There's a lot to talk about today. Andrew, thank you for that. Let's keep checking. Let's also turn now to CBC's Paul Hunter, who's in Washington. So, Paul, we talked before about why this was happening right now. I think maybe that is a old question because it's already happened. You know, the United States key mediator in these negotiations. But it's Sunday afternoon and Monday and the 6 weeks that come after that really matter at this point. So this is all in the Trump administration, in terms of dealing with it.
Yeah, and I think I said earlier, Adrian, that this was the third last day of the Biden presidency. I guess it's the fourth. I got my dates mixed up in my head. But nonetheless, it's at the very, very end of Joe Biden's time as president. So it's a win for him. It's a win for Trump as well, politically, in that as he is, like Joe Biden, trying to claim no small amount of credit for this. And in fairness to both sides, I guess, you know, Joe Biden today, Marco Rubio, Trump's pick for Secretary of State, have both acknowledged that both the Biden and incoming Trump teams worked together to get to this point. One impossible to answer question would be, would we be here had Trump not been making those threats of, you know, hell to pay, were there not a deal in place by the time he took office? Impossible, as I say, impossible to answer that question, but nonetheless worthy of consideration. As you note, not to belittle the hard work that has gone into getting to this point, now the hard part really begins, turning this into something permanent. The Joe Biden administration has made clear throughout this process that a temporary ceasefire, a pause, is only the first step, but a necessary one to get towards something more permanent. The work toward that now falls squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders, and in no small way to Marco Rubio, presuming that he is confirmed as Secretary of State. You know, when you think back to the dawn of the Biden presidency, there was no step up in the war on Ukraine. That began during his time in office. October 7th had not happened on the day that Biden was sworn in. Historians often point to the stuff that happens to presidents once in office. Well, Donald Trump begins his time in office with this on his plate, ensuring that this pause, the initial release of hostages and the subsequent waves over the course of the next 6 weeks continue, that neither side breaks the peace, as it were, that the two sides operate with goodwill and find a way to make this permanent. No small task.
Indeed. Do you anticipate hearing this talked about in his speech on Monday?
Well, there's a speech tonight. Oh, you mean Donald Trump?
I mean Donald Trump, the next president.
Yeah, we'll hear more from Joe Biden tonight. He's making his farewell address from the Oval Office live on TV. We'll have that on the National tonight, of course. But yeah, on Monday, the other guy, Donald Trump, has a giant platform upon which to speak about his vision for the next 4 years, what he plans to do as president. I'm talking about his inaugural address, obviously. Almost certainly, there is a paragraph being written in there today speaking to this, which I will also say almost certainly he will chalk up as something that he has achieved even before he became president, and his intent to carry this through towards something lasting. And as I was saying earlier, growing the Abraham Peace Accords to broaden the circumstance in the Middle East.
Hunter, thanks very much. You're on my dance card, I think, for Sunday and Monday. I don't know if you had other plans, but we'll be there in Washington together. Certainly a ton of things to talk about. Thank you, Paul. So we are going to go back to the region here. That was Paul Hunter in Washington. We're going to go back to Sasha Petrusik, who is still in Jerusalem for us. We've been looking at pictures, Sasha, as Paul was talking, of Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. You know, it is absolutely a place where it is a quiet place, often an angry place. If anybody expected that people would be celebrating, that's certainly not what you see. People are exhausted and they're devastated still. These are the pictures, again, of the vigils happening there, because they don't know what's happening with them or to them come Sunday. Who's coming out? Are they getting bodies? Are they getting family members? Are their family members okay? How could they be after 50 months in captivity? I'm just curious what you are hearing from what people are saying there.
Yeah, you know, Adrian, if you look at the vigil, I was going to call it a protest, but it's not really a protest. The protests that have been held regularly by these same families, including one last night, and there was not this mood of euphoria or celebration. It was all hugs and tears and literally a lot of nail biting. People were just not sure what was going to happen next and whether it was all going to work. And I don't think that any of the announcements, the pronouncements, and the details that we've heard so far today will make them feel that much better or that much more confident that their loved ones are going to be, you know, as we saw last time, being perhaps carried out, perhaps put into ambulances. You know, this is not going to be a happy scene from beginning to end. They realize it is going to be much, much more difficult now dealing with this. And you're right, they don't know whether their loved one is on that list. We don't have the list yet. Some parts of it have been leaked out. There was a suggestion today by Joe Biden that the two Americans will be on that list, but really we don't know, except the categories that they have released, which is children, women, older men, men over 50 years old, those who are sick on humanitarian grounds. That's really this group of 33 that we've been talking about. So that's what we can expect, a trickle every day that they are released, and that's not going to be every day. But starting on Sunday, 3 and 4 coming out in whatever shape they are in. And of course, all of these families are also prepared that some of these people coming out will not be alive because they have not survived these last 15 months of being held in tunnels, underground, perhaps moved around. Some of them have medical needs that perhaps haven't been dealt with. And of course, they've been living through a war, just like everybody else in Gaza in some ways. And that has certainly taken its toll. We've seen those numbers of what we assume are living hostages go down. The estimation by the Israeli government is that about a third of the 100 or so who are left in Gaza are not alive anymore.
Extraordinary. You know, Sasha, I'm thinking back to November of 2023. There was a lot of confusion about who was coming out, and we were looking at the pictures and then cross-referencing them with images that we had of the hostages and saying, I think that's this woman, I think that's that woman. But the families, appropriately so, had been given a list. Every night, the families were given a list. Do you think that's happening in this case? And is that something that won't happen until minutes before they're released? Because I'm trying to figure out, if you're a family member, like, where do you go? What do you do? Who tells you who's coming? Is that communication clear yet?
Yeah. The exact details for each release may not be, but we have been told that the master list of the 33 names of people who are expected to be part of this first phase of hostages released during the ceasefire, that master list should be released as early as tomorrow afternoon, after the government after the Knesset approves this deal, accepts it, and after the wheels get put in motion to actually implement it. Tomorrow is Thursday. They only really have a couple of days to figure this out for the first 3 hostages. So I remember also in November, there was November of 23, when the first hostages came out, there was a fair amount of confusion too about where they were going, and you could see that in the faces of the hostages, but even in the faces of the militants who were holding them, they didn't really know where it was happening. So I expect some of that is also going to be part of this, and none of that is going to make life easier for the families who will not really know probably who is being released on any given day until the last moment, not because anybody wants that confusion, but because this is a very confusing and complicated situation, and that's part of the reason why these negotiations took as long as they did. Not the only reason, but it is part of it.
Absolutely. So going back to what you're saying about the timeline, there's a meeting with the cabinet tomorrow. As I understand it, because Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails are about to be released, there's a mechanism within Israel where families can protest and launch a protest about the release of that particular person. It's largely a slightly rubber stamp process, but they still have that capacity. Then I guess there is the meeting in Cairo about how to get humanitarian aid in. And then I suppose the last thing to deal with is the military. And you were speaking earlier, a couple hours ago, about what the Israeli military's plans are as far as we know. Can you update us on that?
Yeah, you're right. All of these things will likely be happening kind of in tandem because they're different groups that are doing it. We are hearing even tonight that the military has started to implement its plan for this ceasefire. Obviously, the main thing that they will have to worry about is not fighting anymore, but there's much more to it than that. Really, there isn't anybody in charge in Gaza. So, we've heard the aid organizations talk about how dangerous it is, how difficult it is to distribute food and aid in Gaza, but that's also going to have an impact on this. And for the Israeli government, for instance, up until now, it's been difficult to even find out how many of these 33 hostages are alive and how many are not, partly because they're not all held by Hamas. Hamas was at the table, but there are other militant groups in Gaza who have been holding and still hold some of these hostages. They may not be in touch with Hamas on a daily basis, or maybe even they don't know where all the hostages are. So there's very complicated factors that are involved in this. The military is really the only way to get at this, to find perhaps the hostages. And then once the hostages are found, once Hamas is sort of handing them over, the logistics of this will really have to be handled by the military, not in a fighting role, but obviously in a very different kind of role this time. So, their role will be to get out of the way in a military sense, but also to be very much involved in this process, which is not getting any less complicated by the day.
It certainly isn't, but at least we understand that there is something happening today. There wasn't a further delay. I can see people gathering. I think it's 10 o'clock at night in Jerusalem where you are, if the math is right. Yeah, that's right. And so I see people gathering in Hostage Square there as well. And I suspect there's not going to be a lot of sleeping in the next few days until this is sorted. Families on the move, people potentially flying in. Sasha Petrusik, thank you very much. We will absolutely be talking, certainly, if not in the next few hours, definitely in the next few days. So earlier, we spoke about dashed hopes on both sides over previous ceasefire deals that didn't stick, also the uncertainty about this one if it happens. And to have that conversation, I was talking with CBC News' senior international correspondent, Margaret Evans, in London, who has been in and out of the Middle East for the better part of 25 years. Here's some of our conversation.
It makes me think for people on all sides, you know, of how much anguish that must fill people with. Palestinians who've lost thousands since then, more than 10,000 we hear, and the families of the hostages who saw that as a chance to bring their loved ones home, and some haven't come home since then. So, you know, you sit on the edge and you hope that they're close, but the silence, there have been so many things along the way. And there are so many little things, even in this first phase, which has apparently been decided, which aren't clear. For instance, that, you know, how do people get home on foot? The Palestinians are supposedly to be allowed to return to the north on foot, but much of the north has been changed, destroyed. You know, the debate about what kind of buffer zone the Israelis are going to be able to keep. And then, of course, everybody's waiting for those moments of the exchanges. The first 3 hostages to be released, we understand, will be women. And in the following days, you will see the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails as well. There are about more than 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails at this stage.
All right, that was CBC senior international correspondent Margaret Evans reporting and talking with us from London. So last hour, I also spoke with Yasmin Magal from Jerusalem. Her cousin, Omar Nutra, was taken hostage by Hamas in that October 7, 2023 attack. And they thought he was alive this whole time. But a month ago, her family learned that Omar had died in Gaza. Don't know much about the circumstances there. So we asked her about how they're holding up, what they've been through, and what her thoughts are on the ceasefire. Let's have a listen.
Omar was taken alive, and we've been fighting for 14 months, thinking that we have the chance and the hope to get him back alive. But a month ago, we received the news that Omar was killed by the terrorists. And now our fight has changed, and we're fighting in the hope of getting his body back for a proper burial.
It's terrible, you know, and when you say you learned that in December, and here we are, it's not that long after that. Is this day a very mixed day for you then?
Yes, because it is a very difficult shift to make from the hope of hugging him again to the hope of burying him. And I don't wish for anyone to have to hope to bury their loved one. But he deserves a proper burial, and we deserve to have a grave, and the other families deserve to be reunited with their loved ones. So I'm just hopeful that we're on the right path for that.
Also exhausted? Are you completely exhausted?
For sure, for sure. Mixed feelings, exhausted. I'm hoping that we can put this all behind us very soon.
How do you feel about your country now? Like, where are you at in terms of the emotions of the last year?
Do you mean Canada, or do you mean Israel?
No, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I should be clear. You're Canadian, but you're also an Israeli. So I'm talking about Israel in particular here.
I think that right now is the most hopeful that people have been for over a year. So, I mean, hopefully we'll get them back. And I mean, I feel the hope in the air. So, yeah.
That must feel like an unusual feeling after what everyone's been through the last 15 months. So hope in the air, that sounds pretty extraordinary. Is there anything that you would want Canadians to understand about this moment from your perspective?
I think that a lot of Canadians still don't know that there are still hostages being kept in Gaza. And I mean, that they now might get released. And I mean, this is just such a humanitarian issue. And to keep a family from not knowing if their loved one is dead or alive for 14 months, only for us to find out that Omer was dead this whole time, is just torture. And I mean, we deserve to have him back, and everyone just deserves to have everyone back. And taking people hostage is just such a crime against humanity.
So that was Yasmin Magal speaking with us earlier from Jerusalem. As you heard her explain there, her cousin, Omar Nutra, was taken hostage by Hamas and later died in Gaza. So after months of these stalled talks, we're here today because a deal has finally been secured. And we want to take you back to the moment a little earlier when some of the details were laid out to the watching global audience a little over an hour ago from Doha. Take a listen.
The phase one of the agreement will go on for 42 days, and it will include a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli forces to the east away from populated areas. Israeli forces will then be positioned along the Gaza border, and which will allow for the swap of prisoners as well as the swap of remains and the return of the displaced people to their residences. This will also facilitate the travel of wounded and sick people in order to receive treatment. Phase one also includes an increased flow of relief and humanitarian aid to all parts of the Gaza Strip, as well as the rehabilitation of hospitals, health centers, bakeries, and allowing the entry of fuel and civil defense equipment, as well as basic necessities for displaced people who lost their houses as a result of the war. In phase one, Hamas will be releasing 33 Israeli captives, including civilian women and female recruits, as well as children, elderly people, as well as civilian ill people and wounded, in return for a number of prisoners who are being held in Israeli prisons. Regarding phases 2 and 3, the details will be finalized during the implementation of phase 1. The state of Qatar reaffirms the necessity of both sides committing to the implementation of all 3 stages of the agreement in order to prevent civilian bloodshed and in order to shield our region from the consequences of this conflict and ensure that we have lasting peace in the region.
So that was Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, the Prime Minister of Qatar, outlining the details there. Qatar has been there from day one trying to negotiate this and will be there throughout the course of certainly the next 6 weeks and then whatever happens after. U.S. President Joe Biden approached a podium today from the White House, and he talked about the contours of the ceasefire and how it is. They were very clearly laid out. He went to great pains to explain this, laid out by his administration last May. So this afternoon, crediting painstaking American diplomacy for getting it to this stage. Let's listen to him.
More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families. There was no other way for this war to end than with a hostage deal. And I'm deeply satisfied this day has finally come, for the sake of the people of Israel and the families waiting in agony, and for the sake of the innocent people in Gaza who suffered unimaginable devastation because of the war. The Palestinian people have gone through hell. Too many innocent people have died. Too many communities have been destroyed. In this deal, the people of Gaza can finally recover and rebuild. They can look to a future without Hamas in power.
Okay, so let's turn now to CBC's Chris Reyes, who is in New York. Chris is tracking the official reaction to the ceasefire in the United States, also the UN. Chris, what are you hearing?
You know, for a little while there, Adrian, we were watching a lot of empty podiums, and it seemed that they were all waiting for one another. And very shortly after the Qatari Prime Minister spoke and started taking questions, it seemed that the White House got the signal that President Biden would come out and speak. You already heard a part of what he said there as he was with the Vice President as well as the Secretary of State. But then he also went on to explain that he did bring in the members of Trump's team to be part of the negotiation, something that the Qatari Prime Minister talked about, and that it was the strength of negotiators from both administrations that really helped to move this deal forward. Have a listen to President Biden explain that.
You know, those of you who have followed the negotiations can attest, the road to this deal has not been easy. I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States. This deal was developed and negotiated under my administration, but its terms will be implemented, for the most part, by the next administration. In these past few days, we've been speaking as one team.
And we did hear from the Qatari Prime Minister that Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, was in the room as he made the announcement about this deal. This is something that Trump talked about in a post on social media today, even before we heard from anybody in any one of those podiums, Adrian. President-elect Donald Trump took to social media, as he often does, and he made the announcement that this deal was done. This is what he first wrote a little over 2 hours ago. He said, "We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you." He then posted another lengthier post 15 minutes later talking about this epic ceasefire agreement and how it could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans. Notably absent in that very lengthy post, Adrian, is any credit to President Biden and his team. Now, President Biden seemed to have zero patience for anybody taking credit on this. He was, in fact, asked that question as he walked away from the podium, and he said, "Is that a joke?" But I think it's also worth noting that in that statement, he made sure that it was very clear that this deal is the plan that he put forward back in May, the three-phase plan that his team worked very hard to get approval here at the United Nations from the Security Council. So in that sense, he made sure that his team got credit for this deal, which he called the hardest negotiation of his life, of his career.
Well, when something goes right, lots of people are quick to claim credit. And it is, to be entirely fair, people who were close to that negotiations were saying that the presence of Steve Witkoff from the Trump envoy at the table, as well as those from the Biden administration working together and speaking as one, was pretty impressive for the negotiators, and certainly indicated how seriously they are taking this. I do want to ask you about the UN Secretary General, but in the interim, I think it's important to remind people that we're talking in celebratory terms about a ceasefire, but that doesn't mean the violence is over. We're checking reports about Palestinians killed in the West Bank. Certainly, there are some suggestions that it's not over in Gaza right now, and we have to try to figure out what is happening there. So people are afraid, but wanting to celebrate, but also nervous. But to your point about the UN, what did Antonio Guterres say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and really, it's United Nations workers who know firsthand just how grave the situation is in Gaza, and we've heard in some of the gravest terms from Secretary General Antonio Guterres what those in Gaza are dealing with on a daily basis. To the point that almost the entire population is in danger of starvation. Those were some of his recent statements. And really, I think the Secretary General came out today, not to answer any questions about this deal, but to make sure that the message was clear that at least for the UN's part, their #1 priority is to really surge that humanitarian assistance into the region as soon as possible and to call on all parties to remove obstacles for those humanitarians to get in. Have a listen to what he said.
I call on all relevant parties to uphold their commitments and ensure that this deal is fully implemented. From the outset of the violence, I've called for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Our priority now must be to ease the tremendous suffering caused by this conflict. The United Nations stands ready to support the implementation of this deal and scale up the delivery of sustained humanitarian relief to the countless Palestinians who continue to suffer.
And Adrian, you guys have talked a lot about the fact that details around the reporting mechanism of this deal is still up in the air, that those are details that we're not aware of as of yet. But I can tell you that, often a lot of the briefings that happen here at the UN, whether it's at the Security Council or at the General Assembly, is firsthand reports from the UN staff who have been able to get into Gaza and deliver whatever humanitarian aid they can throughout this war, and this war has taken the lives of so many UN staff, and often they are bringing in firsthand reports from the area, and so as soon as this deal is activated, we'll hear right here from the UN how quickly they're going to be able to bring in that aid into the region.
Okay. All right, Chris Reyes reporting for us from New York. Chris, thank you. We're keeping an eye, and we're not showing you the pictures yet because we're still trying to verify them, but there are celebrations apparently happening all throughout the Middle East. Some pictures I've seen out of Aleppo, places in Lebanon, of people. It's sinking in that this is real and still celebrating. At the same time, certainly in Gaza, they're keeping an eye on the skies because there's no promise that there won't be violence between now and then, but they are allowing themselves to dream of a better day. So we are looking at those pictures once we feel comfortable that they're real, because this is an era where you have to verify, then we will show them to you. So let's go back now to CBC's Paul Hunter, who is in Washington. I suppose, what does all this mean for Donald Trump and his incoming administration? Because today he's doing I mean, it's too early to call it a victory lap, but he's certainly claiming credit very early, and no reason why he shouldn't do that. But what is the pressure on him now?
Yeah, I mean, even from the Biden side, there's been a significant amount of acknowledgement of the engagement and work of the incoming Trump team to get things to this point. I mean, if you don't mind, Adrian, before I dive in on that, just a couple of tidbits have come up at the State Department briefing today that I think are kind of interesting. One is there was a fair bit of talk about the aid incoming at this point, the surge that they talk about. From state, word is that they expect about 500 trucks a day. That's obviously a lot of aid. The hard part, having got to this point, once you get in, is what they call the last mile. You hear that term in a lot of circumstances. But getting it not just into Gaza, but into the hands and mouths of people who so desperately need it. That's a lot easier to talk about than it is to actually do. So even though the gates literally will be opened shortly, even with those 500 trucks a day going in, there's a lot of work that is involved in then getting what's in those trucks specifically to the people desperately in need. The other interesting thing that I thought that came out of the State Department briefing was, what happened recently to get us to today? And the answer was sort of in two parts, one on either side of the equation here, the Hamas side and the Israel side. And by the way, the finger was pointed mostly at Hamas as being the sticky point over the course of time here. On the Hamas side, it seems, this is from State Department, that there came the realization that on the presumption that Hamas's larger goal here was to instigate a regional war, that wasn't going to happen. We saw the back and forth between Israel and Iran not too long ago, and likewise between Hezbollah and Israel. And neither of those ended up going into a broader regional war. And there seems to be the realization that that wasn't going to happen on the Hamas side. On the Israel side came the realization that effectively they'd done what they set out to do, decimate the Hamas leadership. And those two realizations together is what brought people to today. To your question, now it falls to Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, his presumed Secretary of State, who along with Steve Witkoff, I imagine will be spending a lot of time going back and forth from here to there over the next period of time. The hard part is now making this deal permanent, to get toward governance of Gaza, to get toward reconstruction, to get toward security in Gaza going forward, and maintaining the pause, maintaining the peace that exists now for this moment into something permanent. And all of that falls now to Donald Trump and his, as I say, presumed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. No easy task.
Interesting, not lost in anyone, I think, who covers U.S. politics, that tonight is the night that Joe Biden delivers his last sort of address to the nation as president, his legacy speech. I don't think the timing of any of this is coincidental. This will be clearly a huge motivator to for them to get this done. So we'll be watching for that tonight. CBC's Paul Hunter in Washington, and we'll see you at the inauguration, Paul.
Indeed.
So CBC senior correspondent Sasha Petrusek, again, is in Jerusalem. And Sasha, this is a moment for us to, as we've been talking in broad terms about the ceasefire over the course of the evening there in the Middle East, we've been learning a few more details. Can you give us the bare essence of what is about to happen?
Yeah, we're about to see a very complicated process in terms of logistics in many of the ways that we've already discussed, in terms of the military side of things, in terms of the logistics of getting all these hostages out, the ones that have been promised, releasing all these Palestinians that's more than 1,600 in Israeli jails. The aid operation that will need to be ramped up in order to get those extra trucks, hundreds of trucks in every day. That's enormous. And over top of all of this, I guess, is the ongoing friction, the ongoing mistrust between the two parties that have to implement this, which is Hamas and the Israeli government. That has built up, enormously over the last 15 months, of course, before that as well. So that will have to be overcome. But it was interesting to hear from the Israeli president tonight, Isaac Herzog, who said that, Israel failed its citizens back on October 7th, 2023. And this agreement is a way to overcome that, to basically make amends. And it may not be the driving force, the only force behind why they got to this stage, but certainly there is a feeling here that if the peace can last, most people here would say that it was worth whatever price Israel is now paying in terms of whatever they feel that they have had to give up in order to get to this agreement. Because frankly, I mean, for most people in this country, they're frustrated and they're just tired of this war.
Indeed, everyone is. Sasha Petrusek, thank you for your reporting. I know we'll be talking certainly in the next few days. For you, those of you at home, we are working with our journalists in Gaza, Mohammed Al-Saifi, who's been taking some pictures for us. Over the course of the next few hours, you'll see reaction from there because the story is ongoing. But we now need to hand things over to Chief Political Correspondent Rosie Barton and Power and Politics host David Cochrane in Ottawa, because they're on top of the other huge story of the day. That is the meeting of the Prime Minister and provincial premiers to discuss that 25% tariff threat from Donald Trump. So in a few minutes, we'll be hearing from the leaders after their meeting. Thank you for joining us for the special coverage of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. I'm Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
every different region of the country has a deep relationship with our single biggest trading partner.
We have to prepare for what's coming next week.
I'm fearful of what might happen. I think a lot of our meeting today is going to be trying to plan for the what-ifs and could-haves.
The potential tariffs that we know are coming will impact all of us.
All Americans and Canadians are going to pay more for everything.
Yes, we are going to have a